Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. I would like to call to order our regular council meeting for Tuesday, November the 12th. And I'll begin with our territorial acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge that we are holding our meeting this evening on the traditional territory of the Wasanich people. And I'd like to go into our usual public participation. And for anyone who might be a new speaker, we do allow speakers a maximum of approximately 3 minutes. And we would ask that you come forward, identify your name and your address, and please speak to any item on the agenda or whichever an item that you prefer. So I'll call for a first time. Is there anyone wishing to address council this evening? Good evening.
My name is Jason Rod. I live at
Just the button there, Jason. For yeah.
Okay. My name is Jason Rod. I live at 2307 Orchard Avenue in Sydney, and I'm the one that organized the petition to try and improve the situation over there on 8th Street, and appreciate your consideration for that. And I've read the town's report on it. It looks like they're in support of it, so it looks like it's a good thing that might happen. And I just wanted to make a comment about the fence that's proposed to go there. The reason we're asking for a concrete fence is for manifold reasons. The dust that emanates from the yard, for one thing, and the site that is there. Chain link fence is fine for keeping people in and out, but it doesn't block the sites and things. And if you go down that old path where the cyclists used to go, you can see what the back side of their work yard looked like. It's not really looked after that well. Stuff is dumped in there. Nothing against the guys that work there. They're all great guys, but it's just a workplace to them. But to us, it's our neighborhood, and we'd like to see something blocking that site if we can. And I guess that's all I have to say about that. And thank you very much again for your consideration.
Thank you for your comments.
Hey.
Good evening, Wayne McNevin, 2326 Orchard Street, and I'm here in support of the petition. I guess it was in the summertime that right at the end of Orchard Street that the town took down all the trees that were there that did block that area. And we were kind of told at the beginning that they were going to put in some new stuff, but now we don't know if that's happening at all. So if you look down Orchard Street, now you just look into the yard that's there. And the other thing is, because now they've taken down all the trees and they're using the yard where they extended it, all the dust is just blowing down the street and that kind of stuff. The other thing is safety. So they've moved the cycle path, which old cycle path used to go straight onto Ocean and hook up with the cycle path itself. Now it's moved over here, which is great. It all looks good. But now they have to go down 8th Street. And there's no cycle path, there's no sidewalk, so it's just an open street. So there's a bit of a safety issue. The town did an incredible job on the safety building and all the landscaping around there. It looks really good. And there's a beautiful sidewalk that comes down, but then it just stops. And then you have that just one block where there's nothing. So I guess that supports what we're talking about. Thanks.
Thank you for your comments.
So, good evening. David Calverley, 9655 First Street. 2 brief comments. One, I continue to be a bit confused, I'll be honest. Even reading the minutes of the previous council meeting, which involved the denial of the Happy Buddha. And I just look at it and I say, well, the basis for denying that it's clearly stated that the Happy Buddha did not meet the requirements of policy DV015. Fair enough, that I understand. However, very shortly afterwards, there was a unanimous resolution and in fact motion carried to remove the requirements for cannabis stores to meet DV015. I don't follow the logic. And if you pass the first one first, or the third one first, and removed that requirement, then there would have been no basis to have denied the actual application. I've consulted with staff. It's maybe my aged brain, but I can't understand it. Second point, and I'll be very rapid, no reflection at all on this council or certainly not on staff, but just to go on the record that having read the agenda tonight and the comments about the funding for the community safety building, at 16 million, the cost overrun is $6.85 million on the community safety building. That works out to $586 per capita. Compare that with $490 per capita for Victoria's Blue Bridge, significantly more. Just a suggestion, I do understand that you see funds because of loan caps, lending limits. You have to use about 7 million. Before you decide what to do with the rest, maybe some community input, just an idea. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Hello, I'm Joanne Edwards from 2388 Marvet Place. Could you press the button? Thank you.
Please.
From 2388 Marvet Place. Got some notes here in crayon, so excuse me. I have two things I wanted to speak to council about today. One was just to reiterate our neighborhood's objection to the development permit variance for the rise. The fact that it needs to have increased setbacks up to pretty much the property lines is confirmation on our part that this building is far too big for its location and for the neighborhood. Second, it was just a question for council. As the largest municipality, will you be able to use your voice to help parents like me and many others help get their kids back to school? Is there anything that this council can do to use your voice to urge the province to step in and end the strike? Because it's having a major impact. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
My name is Clarence Bolt. I live at 9659 2nd Street in Sydney. And a couple issues I'd like to address. And one is the change of council time. I feel quite strongly that 6 o'clock for council meetings is really a bad time. 6 o'clock for committee meetings is a bad time for a lot of people. Those who go to meetings, those of us who are those kind of geeks, you know, it's probably not that big a problem. But there are people who go to work and come home from work. There are families, it's dinner time. And for a lot of meetings, it's not going to be that much of an issue, but there are things like public hearings. And we want to make sure that as many people as possible can respond to things. And the public participation part is right at 6 o'clock. So again, that hits into the dinner hour. I feel it cuts down on public participation, the ability of the public to participate. That's one thing. A second, I would have liked to have seen a little more public process with respect to this changes. North Saanich and Central Saanich, at least in the past, when I lived in those municipalities, had what they called a question period. In other words, it doesn't necessarily mean that the questions get answered, but people ask questions. So rather than just simply public participation being people standing up here talking, they could actually ask questions. And staff could answer them, council could answer them, or be directed in a way to have those questions answered for them. And the point is that puts things out into the public in a different way. I would like to see that considered at least, a question period as well. And correspondence. There are municipalities in which the correspondence is actually, some of it that's applicable is answered at the council table rather than just simply received and then dealt with in the ether. Anyway, that's, I'd like to have seen a better public process. There's a couple of comments, so I'd like to see the meeting stay at 7. Second, I'd like to speak briefly about the Happy Buddha issue as well. I've heard comments made that the proponents knew what was up and all of that kind of thing. Let me suggest that both parties knew what was up. When on August 12th, when the zoning bylaw was amended and DV 015 was passed, both parties knew the conditions, opaque glass and and there's a tacit understanding then of both parties knew that, at least were aware of the conditions, not all of the aspects of it, that the proponent in good faith met the conditions that they felt. Now, if they haven't met the conditions, and there was a staff report that they didn't have the active storefront. Oh, let me make a comment quickly about that. DV1015 had this business about active storefronts. I have researched your bylaws. I do not see anywhere where that is a requirement. The OCP 21.3.4 has a policy that talks about inviting storefronts and connected to the outside, but it's a should. A should is not a must. A should is aspirational. There's nothing on active storefront in that. This policy, DV015, was created specifically for cannabis use or cannabis operations. Anyway, I would have expected that when the staff report came, that, okay, the license wasn't recommended, that then instead of immediately moving to ban it off Beacon, that council would have negotiated with the operator and said, okay, let's put a hold on this, let's talk about it, figure out a way to do it. Instead, immediately reject Beacon and then change the ruling that David Calvely mentioned. Anyway, those are my points. Thank you.
It's on. Good evening. Reg Kirkham, 9461 Braun Crescent. I'm just here about Ray Creek. And I'm here tonight just to remind the Town of Sydney administration and this Mayor and Council of their environmental responsibilities for the protection of all the existing species, flora, fauna, within the surrounding ponds and the creek area. As I understand, we're ramping up some work. I'm requesting that you work directly in conjunction with Transport Canada and Victoria Airport authorities to carry out in a swift and well-coordinated plan to have all required works completed in a sensitive but timely manner as to have the least amount of impact and damage to this decades-old wetland habitat and the species that all coexist in that habitat. The days of arguing as to the origin of the pond, the natural state of the geography around its surroundings, it needs to be set aside. So none of us were there, okay? None of us were to see and we have varying stories as to its original state, other than the fact it was a wild salmon-bearing stream that once fed a village of thousands at the mouth of Bazin Bay. And it was part of a grease trail that, in conjunction with 1010 Creek, connecting villages on both sides of the peninsula and providing transportation corridors, medicine, and natural spring-fed ritual bathing ponds in the Kenora area, was stated by our MLA Adam Olson at our rally in 2016. And then it had an airport put on top of it. And we weren't responsible for that either. But it happened. And both the Sydney and the Transport Canada share the responsibilities for the state it has been rendered into in the past 30 years. And that past 30 years, I've resided on the shore of at that pond and that dam. So I have seen what it was when it began, and I see what it is today. And I just encourage you all to, maybe just take a moment and walk down and step onto the dam or step off the side of the street and just sit down and listen to the birds and look at the activity that goes on there. I get to see that. I'm very fortunate. The other day we had two young fellas, about 12 years old, down at the dam fishing. And I first thought, hey, they shouldn't be doing that. And I thought, good for them. And I went over and talked to these two young guys, and they were having a ball. And I said, you better not let the fish cops catch you. And, we're doing catch and release, very well educated in what they were doing. And they also informed me of how many fish they were catching and how many release, and I watched these guys. And what a wonderful thing, that and just everything that's taking place. So again, I just want to encourage you and take a second look at this. We don't need that habitat to look like one of our, within a 1 block radius, big pits we're digging, taking out trees and digging big pits. That's not the way this thing needs to be cleaned up. It needs to be taken on in a very sensible and soft-walked manner. So, but I hope you all get together with Transport Canada and work as a team. And would be wonderful if we were included also in this participation, because we as the residents and neighbors and the whole community, but we've been left out of this show for a long, long time. And so we're just looking for a little respect and a little activity, and I hope you guys move on in a sensible manner with all this, and we get her done, you know. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll call for a second time if anyone is wishing to address council this evening. And call for a third time. Is there anyone? Good evening.
Good evening, Your Worship, council, staff, members of the public. My name is Greg Gillespie, Development Manager for Mike Garrett Construction. We are the applicant for item 14C on your agenda this evening. Wanted to take this time to thank council and staff and APC once again for the feedback received on our applications to date. If my math serves me correctly, we've been through 1 APC, 2 Committee of the Wholes, and 4 council meetings, and we truly appreciate the thorough discussion and comments that we've received. With this feedback, we believe the project has improved since its conception, and we ask that council reaffirm its previous position and vote in favor of the applications before you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no other speakers, we'll close public participation, and now I'd like to move to approval of the agenda. We do have a late item. Councillor Rantoul will have a late item that we will place under on the agenda under item new business 15B. And if I could have a motion regarding the agenda.
Move adoption as amended.
Second.
Those in favor, all motion carries. Thank you. Now look for, we have our regular council meeting minutes of October 28th, 2019.
I'll move the minutes be adopted.
Second.
Any errors or omissions? I'll call the question. Those in favor? Motion carries. We'll now move to item 7. Item 7 is petitions, and we do have a petition received for tonight. It's a request for improvements to 8th Street, and we have a staff report dated November 5th and a recommendation.
I'll move the recommendation that staff be directed to 1, prepare detailed designs for road and pedestrian improvements on 8th Street, Orchard Avenue to Ocean Avenue, and 2, bring forward a budget for improvements to 8th Street from Orchard Avenue to Ocean Avenue for consideration by council during the 2020 budget deliberations.
Second, discussion? Councillor O'Keefe and Councillor Fallon. First, sorry, she made the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just through you to staff, if are we also looking at least painting in a bicycle lane with these proposed in this proposed design?
Through the mayor to Councillor Fallon. Bike lane wasn't proposed through 8th Street through that section. We've used a standard 8.5 meter wide traveled lane and parking. We feel that the volume of traffic through there probably doesn't really warrant individual bike lane.
Thank you. If I could just, when I look at that and I see that on the north side of Ocean Avenue, there is that portion, I think it's just a natural inclination to carry on, at least on the east side would seem to be the obvious thing to carry on from there. And like I say, even if it's just painted and not in any other way separated, I think there should be an actual allowance for it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So I'm in favor of the motion. I guess what I'm pondering is we will have requests for sidewalks and other things on the west side, which has been something that's been an issue for residents over there as well. So I'm hoping when staff come forward with the proposal for the budget, it'd be helpful, I don't know, if we had sort of a list of all the similar sorts of things. And you know, I guess residents being aware that there are other issues like this that have been brought forward by other residents as well. So just wanted to toss that comment out there.
Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question to staff, we're talking about chain link fencing with hedging and saying the hedging would take a few years to grow. Few years ballpark figure, because that's a fairly, you know, depending on how long it is, to have that much dust, like I know exactly what they're talking about, the dust and the noise and everything, not having some kind of buffer for them. So I'm just kind of curious as to what kind of fast growing hedge we could put in there if we went that route.
Through the mayor to Councillor Garnett, yeah, the type of hedging we'd typically put in would be a cedar hedging. Yeah. We'd want to irrigate it just to get it well established. But yeah, it depends on the stock that's available. Typically though, you have better success with a hedge that's maybe a little shorter. It establishes, it's more of a healthy, vigorous growth versus trying to get in a very tall, you know, 6 or 8 foot plant at the very beginning. They tend not to be as vigorous and healthy in the end.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. Yeah, because that would be, from their perspective, that would also be my concern if I lived in the neighborhood, having to, especially the people that live around 8th Street, that would be a bit of an issue. So it'd be good to come up with something that alleviates their concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I concur with Councillor Falla's suggestion about the painted bike lane, just simply because we've also built that bike lane through and we've got the other bike lane going down. It feels like if we're going to be kind of intentionally directing bike traffic there, to have that demarcated the entire way so that it is very clear that this is where we intend the bicycle traffic to go would be helpful. And I guess through you to staff, about that fence, well, the cedar hedging, I do worry what we're going to use instead of cedar now that all of the cedars in the town are dying here too. Is it possible, I believe the reason for not wanting to do a cement fence is just that increases the width of the area you would need. Would there be a similar problem with like a wood fence or something else that would be a higher fence for them?
To the mayor, to Councillor. The concrete fence that's requested is it'll be a low maintenance fence compared to wet wood. If we put a wood fence in there, it would be an ongoing maintenance item. The concrete fences that are available, they're quite expensive to install. We did a rough estimate for this length. It would be probably in the magnitude of about $50,000 for a concrete fence versus chain link and hedging. There may be some other things we can do to that chain link fence to help improve the visual and dust, putting some baffles and through there to help that visual block until that hedge were to get better established.
Mr. Humble?
One thing to note as well, and it's indicated in the staff report, that the maximum height for a fence is 6 feet. Of course, they could apply for, we could grant a variance, obviously, with respect to this. It's also worth noting that a hedge, there's no limit with respect to the ultimate height of a hedge. So, I mean, we could be talking about, over time, the hedge growing to, 10, 12 feet or more in height. So it's a consideration as well.
I would like to make a few comments as well, and I'll start with the cycle path. This section, this new pathway from adjacent to the highway over to 8th Avenue, and then along 8th Avenue to Ocean, and Ocean out to Lochside Drive, is formally a section of the Lochside Trail, which has an outstanding reputation and significant use in the Capital Regional District, particularly with BC ferries coming in at the north end, and even residents using it to get about Sydney. So I think it's important that we indicate through bicycle lanes, through signage, that this is a part of the Lochside Trail, that there's no question in people's minds when they're using it. And I would start at the entrance from the paved pathway coming down from Mary Winspear adjacent to the highway. Significant signage there. I don't know what is typically used in terms of paint when a pathway is both pedestrian and bicycle, which that pathway will be for the short corridor over to 8th. But certainly on 8th Street, I would be very much in favor of having a formal bicycle lane, and I would actually suggest we should do that along Ocean as well. And the reason along Ocean is because we do have Iroquois Park, a heavily used park, but along that north side of Ocean Avenue is parking. And so, you know, there's vehicles pulling in and out of there, and I think, you know, when I travel around the city or to other cities and you see the green and the colors used for bicycle paths, it very clearly indicates that there is that use in that space, and whether they're drivers or walkers or riders, it's clear to all. So I think that's speaking to the safety issue that the residents have raised, and would be in favor of an amendment indicating that. Moving to the fence, I read the specific comment or the specific wording in the petition. Install an 8-foot high concrete fence with boulevard trees. So the reason for the concrete fence has been indicated with regards to dust and smell and so on. But the request for boulevard trees is, of course, for the neighborhood, for the ambience of the neighborhood. So we have a unique situation here where on the east side of 8th Avenue we have residential, and on the west side we have a public use, the town works yard. And so with regards to a variance for fence height or something like that, I would be willing to consider those sorts of things given this situation in that neighborhood. But with regards to dust, I'd like to ask for an additional comment from staff in terms of, you know, I don't know how you quantify it, but how much dust is generated, and you know, is it just the homes across the street, or does it affect more of the neighborhood? Is it a regular problem?
To you, Mr. Mayor, certainly it depends on how active we are on the site. We do have phase development plan for the new area that we've got expanded with the lease on the airport lands. I believe in 2021 we've got a wheel wash identified to put in there so that any of the vehicles leaving the works yard would have an opportunity to wash down the wheels, so we weren't tracking dust in and out. Some of the issues that we've had in the past with the development around the CSB and our need to use the yard as a significant transfer station for the earthworks. Again, when the weather's wet, we track a lot of mud down Ocean Avenue. We try our best to limit it to Ocean Avenue. That was one of the reasons why we wanted to move the cycling trail. Certainly the trail fades at 7th Street and Ocean, and the plan was to use signage and maybe some arrows on that point to point them onto 7th Street and then up to Orchard onto the path link. The trend we're seeing from the residents on West Sydney crossing over the Wayne Road, the Weiler overpass, is that they'll go down onto Weiler and use North Lawn and then cut along the gravel asphalt path just to the east side of the works yard. And so we've had many requests from the residents to improve that piece of that link as well in order to allow for better access for people on scooters and things like that. So the idea is to try as much as we can to keep all the traffic in the works yard onto Ocean Avenue and eliminate the further use on 8th Street. Again, a few years ago, we were successful in getting the CRD to actually remove the demarcation of the Lochside Regional Trail from Ocean onto Weiler Avenue so that we could correct that link. And then the idea is to try and deal with public safety as much as we can. Certainly, the Orchard location for the trail link is, in our opinion, much safer than the Ocean one right now. So it's a bit of a win-win. And if we do the improvements through Iroquois Park for the pedestrian traffic as well, we hope to see some improvements as that. And again, as our phased approach says, we hope to mitigate the dust problem within the next couple of years.
Great, thank you. So in terms of the request for for a fence and boulevard trees, what would be the size of the boulevard from the sidewalk to the, to the fence, whatever fence there would be? Is there an actual known, I see there's a map here, but I'm not seeing a particular measurement.
I recall, I believe the boulevard section is quite narrow. We have an existing water main in that boulevard as well. We have to consider drainage, existing drainage ditch. So I believe the boulevard section from the sidewalk to the fence line would be somewhat limited. I think there'd be room for, obviously, for hedging and probably some boulevard trees if we look at appropriate selection of trees that wouldn't impact the water main or sidewalk infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. So there's consideration of the trees in the water main. Does a roadway typically get widened if a formal bicycle lane is installed?
And through to the mayor, typically, yes, you would, if you want a dedicated bike lane and maintain parking as well. We sort of have to look at all the sort of the wish list of what you'd like to see on 8th Street. If we want a dedicated bike lane, we could possibly do a shared lane with traffic. There's a few different avenues we could look at, but typically you would be widening out the surface to accommodate a painted bike lane.
So the section beside the section of 8th beside the current CSB building, that is 8.5 feet wide, or 8.5 meters, sorry, wide?
That's correct, yeah, 8.5 meters wide.
Okay. So does 8.5 meters wide a typical road width, or does that provide for space for a bicycle lane?
That
if you only have parking on one side of the street?
That would provide typically parking on both sides of the street and the 2 traveled lanes.
Okay, thank you. Just one other comment in terms of where the Lochside path from the highway side to 8th Avenue is. It actually opens up right where Orchard Avenue is, and so I can envision people coming off the path and just continuing down Orchard. I mean, if there was no bicycle lane marking or, you know, not significant signage, people just might start using that as a corridor, and I don't know if the residents might get concerned with that because there aren't, you know, sidewalks and that sort of thing in the neighborhood. So I think just another case for dedicated bike lane. Okay, we have a staff recommendation and some considerations from council's remarks. Sorry. Okay, all those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor, if I could just confirm, so there's no amendment with respect to the motion with respect to bike lanes? We're not including those?
Well, I typically don't make amendments, so
No.
I was,
Okay.
if staff can take note of it and Councillor Fallot.
If I may just further to that, when I was originally speaking, I was making a direction sort of to staff to say about paint it, but you're now saying that you want an amendment to, you'd prefer an amendment.
If I can, through the mayor, yeah, what I'm saying is if council wants it considered or us to look at that, it would be good to have a motion to that effect.
If I might speak first for a moment. So I'm seeing that there will be additional cost to what staff has presented in their report for this corridor, that is 8th Avenue and the crosswalk, in terms of putting in a dedicated bike lane on 8th, and as I suggested, given that it's a formal part of the Lochside Trail, to actually do that on Ocean Avenue as well. Realizing that people may take other routes, but if you look at maps, there's maps out all over the place on the internet and printed that show what the Lochside Trail is, and so I think it would be helpful if it's going through a residential neighborhood for it to be clearly marked, and that would, I presume, have additional cost to it.
So my understanding right now is, if memory serves me correctly, there is a painted space on the north side of Ocean that I've recognized as a bike lane or perhaps a visual protected pedestrian way. That's what I was envisioning, but the mayor is now speaking a formal extension of the Lochside Trail. So if I could make a motion that staff look at bringing forward a bike lane to continue the Lochside Trail from Lochside 5th onto Ocean and further onto 8th Street to meet up with the bike pathway between or at the south side of the CSB. Does that cover it?
Sorry, what section again?
So from Ocean to 8th to the south side of CSB where the bike path goes through.
Well, I was considering from Lochside
Yes.
down Ocean to.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. So I need a seconder.
Okay. Any further discussion? I'll call it. Sorry?
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify, just from Mr. Robinson's comments, it sounded to me as though staff were intending to try to get the cyclists to stop using Ocean and to go down Orchard instead, so as not to conflict with the works traffic. Was that?
Through the mayor to Councillor Duncan, that's correct. A few years ago, we actually went to the public, went to the CRD and asked them for a change in the footprint of the Lochside Regional Trail to move it to Weiler Avenue. And part of the public feedback that we got from that was that they said, yes, they were in favor of that, provided that we restricted boat trailer parking to the south side of Weiler Avenue only. So all the new publications on the Lochside do actually show the trail route going from Weiler and then along the highway path, the entire length out towards McDonald Park Road. So Ocean Avenue is not considered part of the Lochside, although it links into the Lochside. The bike lane that we refer to on the north side of Ocean fades at 7th Street. It's because of the vegetation and the narrowness of the boulevard for that last block between 7th and 8th on Ocean as you approach the works yard. It just made it a little bit problematic for sightlines and things like that in that area. So what we're seeing for the tourist users, the recreational users of the Lochside, they seem to be using the new route. The local residents of Sydney are the ones that, as I say, suggest are using Weiler to North Lawn in front of Iroquois and then along 8th Street and down through the new path that we did beside the employee parking lot in the Dairy Queen. So for those of us in the community in the know, that's the preferred route to take. So I would respectfully suggest that we're not going to see a lot of upkeep from the tourists or the recreational users of the Lochside. They're going to stick to what the new mapping says, but certainly there are old publications out there that still show Ocean as part of the Lochside Trail.
Okay, well, I stand corrected. If CRD is indicating that it's Weiler, that is formally the segment of the Lochside Trail, then that I would make the case that there was signage clearly indicating along the paved pathway adjacent to the highway that that's the case, and then again, maybe at a later date, considering a bicycle path on Weiler connecting to Lochside where there's bicycle lanes. I would, if that's the current information, I would remove the suggestion that we should have it as a formal bicycle lane for that small segment on 8th Avenue.
Yeah, I think I'll pull it, and let's look at that then as things settle in there. So if I can withdraw my motion.
The seconder was sorry.
Second.
Thank you. I'm sorry for that confusion. Okay, so we've called the question on that. We'll now move to we're going to move to 9A. And we have a council report, a written council report from Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have 3 councillor reports. 1 is written and 2 will be verbal. So the first one that was submitted as a written report is just a summary of the CRD's regional water supply, I want to say commission budget, not committee, which we adopted on, let's see, it was October 6th, from the October 16th meeting. I guess in brief, it's a large budget. It's $34 million for 2020, which reflects a 6% inflationary increase from last year's budget, which is due to wage increases and increased staffing required, and operating costs, the increase in chemicals and electricity costs for the plant. So it's just about, it's $430,000 higher budget than last year. Mr. Hissick also pointed out to me my bullet 2 here, which says the actual budget was $800,000 over projected. That's actually, they earned $800,000 over the projected budget. This is poorly worded. It is, we earned more money, and the reason for that is bullet 3, which is that we sold a lot more water than was projected, 48 million cubic meters, versus the 46.5 we projected. And every year that's been the case. We sell more than we expected because people are basically using more in the summertime for watering than we expect due to higher temperatures and longer times without rainfall. Agricultural rates have remained the same. It's substantially lower than residential rates. Let's see, the projects that we have coming up, the planned capital projects, it's almost $20 million worth of projects planned for 2020, including $6.2 million in carry forward projects. We've been upgrading Butchart Dam number 5, and I think it's Luby Dam, I can pronounce that right, Luby Dam number 4. There's an infrastructure transfer from the Wanda Fuca water distribution service, supply vault meter replacements, and we've been doing seismic remediation of a number of dams. Butchart Dam number 5 is next year, and instrumentation, seismic instrumentation in Souk Reservoir and Goldstream Reservoir. And they're going to be continuing restoration work in the Leach watershed. That's a designated future water supply area, so they're upgrading roads, restoring culverts and bridges, and doing quite a lot of ecological restoration because it's a formerly logged area, so they're reforesting it to help improve water quality. We're also doing quite a lot of monitoring and instrumentation in the watershed there, so we actually get an idea of baseline water quality and water volumes, so they can help inform projections going forward about how much water could be there and the quality it will be. Capital expenditures will be funded through transfers from the Water Capital Fund, cash reserves, and borrowed funds. No new debt is planned for regional water supply. And we're spending substantially less on our budget, or on our debt servicing than was budgeted, just due to the dropping interest rates. So we're saving $300,000 in interest annually based on the change in rates, which is pretty spectacular. The major projects in the 5-year plan include replacement segments of the number 3 and the number 4 transmission mains. Number 4 is the one that comes out to Saanich Peninsula. Replacement of the ultraviolet disinfection units at the Japan Gulch Goldstream facility, and potential need for a pH adjustment facility. And that, if you've been reading the papers lately, is because it's to reduce the lead leaching potential. We have no lead naturally occurring in our water supply at all. And so where lead may be coming from to people's households would be from old pipes, old distribution mains, and old residential mains. VHA discovered, in fact, that about half of their building had really high lead levels. And so they found the cheapest thing to do is simply flush your tap. When you get up in the morning, run your water. If you suspect you might have lead pipes, you have an older building. How they will be running out testing will be happening in the new year, going backwards from nodes to try and identify neighborhoods and potentially even individual users who might be more at risk of that and might need to do lead testing. But at the water supply level, what we can do to help control that, because not everyone may be able to test their pipes or test their water, is to adjust the pH to reduce the amount of potential leaching that would come out. And that's all just because there is a change in Canada Health guidelines that have actually lowered the permissible lead. So it's not triggered by a change in our buildings so much as a change in what Canada declares allowable now. Short verbal reports. There was also a meeting of the Inter-Municipal Climate Action Task Force. We meet twice a year. So we had a meeting on October 24th, and that's elected officials and staff. It was a presentation on how to communicate about our climate change actions now that many of us have declared climate emergencies, and we were trying to discuss as municipalities what that meant, and how we should be talking to people. Some people have citizens coming to council demanding they do more. Other people have people coming to councils demanding that they do less, and just trying to strike that balance. My main takeaway is that many municipalities are updating their climate action plans. Obviously, we are waiting to do that as we have the OCP in the way, but what it seemed like is that we are already doing a number of things which are climate action things. We're just not promoting them necessarily as such. Discussing about, walkable infrastructure, and Councillor Wainwright had a motion earlier about increasing the speed at which we change over our staff vehicles to electric vehicles. So there are things we are doing, and perhaps we should just make sure that we communicate that we are doing things and how we are looking at what we are doing as climate actions. And mostly that the staff are on it, like the CRD staff and all of the individual municipal staff. They meet more frequently on climate actions than we do, and they know what they're doing. They're in communication. The other one was Livable Cities Forum, which is October 28th and 30th. Similar theme. The theme was building better communities through resilience. And what the speakers kind of circled around on is that, while climate change is a really big, scary thing, and it's hard for people to get their minds around, health and well-being is something everybody can kind of rally behind, and is a kind of a bonding thing. It hasn't been politicized yet, the idea of taking care of your community and increasing community well-being. And so actions that we can take that increase community well-being tend to be actions that also make communities more livable and more resilient to climate change and mitigate climate change. So it's just a win-win all around. So if we can look at things from that framework of building better communities and making our just psychologically and environmentally resilient, we'll go far. Everywhere had the same issues about affordable housing and lack of transportation. I mentioned Oxford, Ontario during the affordable housing report that we had, that they've changed their social housing projects to passive house standard, which they say is about a 3 to 5% difference in cost. And we were referring to the standards to support resilience in infrastructure program from the Canadian Standards Council, which I have not checked out yet, but looked like a good resource. And then I actually went on the active transport tour and looked at the bike lanes and the private electric tour buses through Victoria. I have never actually gone in the bike lanes around Victoria, but it was really awesome. It felt really safe, and it felt, it just felt really nice to be able to travel that way and not have to worry about getting doored or getting run over. And it was a different view having driven past them and then get to use them. So,
thank you. And Councillor Wainwright, item 9B.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the Saanich Peninsula Water Commission and the Wastewater Commission had their budget meetings on October 17th. This just an information item for council and the public. The Peninsula Water System has no debt, and the reserve balances are quite healthy, around 9 million. The capital plan was relatively modest. The commission added one very significant new project to the 5-year plan. The current water supply, there's a single pipeline connecting up Lochside Drive that connects to the number 4 main, and that's actually got sections that are asbestos concrete and not likely to survive a major earthquake. So that's a single point of failure. There is a capital project in the 5-year plan now. Design is going to start in 2023, construction starting in 2024, and this would be assuming we don't get grant money that would allow us to accelerate it. This would put a cross connection across Bear Hill, which would bypass that section of asbestos concrete and essentially provide a redundant water supply to the northern peninsula, including Sydney. So if that section goes out on Lochside, there would still be water to the northern peninsula, assuming that the number 4 main in the regional system is still up. But that would allow us access to all of the reservoirs in the peninsula system. So the ones in the southern part of the peninsula could potentially help out the northern part. There is actually no requirement to expand the infrastructure for growth. So the development cost charges are currently $0 for water. And in terms of the overall budget, the CRD's regional bulk water rate went up by 2.85%, which influences the peninsula because we buy the water from the region. We'll be passing those costs on. The rate, the wholesale rate to the town of Sydney will be going up by 4.16%, and the average cost to a typical household in Sydney annual cost would be $9.59, so that's pretty reasonable. On to the wastewater one, it also has no debt, and the overall 2020 requisition is increasing by 1.55%, which is pretty modest. There is a development cost charge still on that, and that's actually paying for infrastructure that was previously built to provide capacity for growth. And the existing treatment plant is expected to be able to handle well, it's currently only at 50% capacity, so that is expected to be able to accommodate growth on the peninsula for at least the next 20 years. And I think that's all the stuff I'd want to mention out of this.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Are there any Councillor O'Keefe?
Thank you. I have an update on accessibility issues. So I attended a community forum on accessibility, I think it was last week, and there's approximately 35 people there from the community who came out, and this is to provide feedback on the provincial government's proposed legislation on accessibility. So it involved, there was staff from here and from other municipalities and members of the community and council members as well. Some of the things that came out of that was the need to have consistency across municipalities for access issues for persons with disabilities. There was a suggestion that perhaps there might be a Saanich Peninsula advisory committee focused on accessibility issues that the 3 local governments could tap into. The focus of the current Access Awareness Committee for the most part has been focused on organizing the one-day access awareness event in June, which the town funds, and that has been focused a lot on seniors. And so as a result of these conversations that we had at this forum, they're thinking now to perhaps broaden their terms of reference and then come back to us and the other councils with a proposal for sort of a more broader based committee that councils could tap into. So watch for more on that. Related to this is a workshop for employers on persons with disabilities. So one thing that I've noted at that forum, and there was 2 others that I've been to, so 3 forums that I've been to so far, and the one thing that we keep hearing is that persons with disabilities are overrepresented in the poverty, under the poverty line, and the difficulty they have finding employment. And the other thing we also hear is that employers in our community are struggling to keep their businesses going because they can't find employees. So I came across a 2-hour workshop that's offered by the Victoria Disability Resource Center, and it focuses on employers and giving them information to sort of demystify what the different types of disabilities are, issues of accommodation, how to reach out to persons with disabilities, and how they can become valuable employees. So I chatted with the folks from the Access Awareness Committee, the Chamber of Commerce, and the SBIA, so they thought it would be a good thing. So that course will be run at the Shoal Center on November 29th from 9 till 11. So we'll get the word out to the community about that, and hopefully have a good turnout.
Thank you, Councillor. That concludes our council reports, and I'd like to move to committee reports. And the first we have is the Committee of the Whole meeting for November 4th, and we have the minutes.
I'd like to move receipt of the minutes.
Second. Discussion, those in favor? Motion carries. And we have the first recommendation.
I'd like to remove myself for this item, if I may, Mr. Mayor, under potential conflict of interest. My wife works for Amica.
Thank you. Councillor Wainwright.
I'll move the development permit application number DP 100806, that's 2315 Mills Road, be forwarded to the Advisory Planning Commission for further review and comment.
I'll second.
Discussion? Call the question, all in favor? Motion carries, thank you. Just wait for Councillor Rentoul to return. Thank you. And we have recommendation 2.
Yeah, thank you. I'll move recommendation 2 that the Town of Sydney 2019 Housing Needs Report dated October 29th, 2019, prepared by Urban Matters CCC, be received, and that the Housing Needs Report be posted on the town's website as per provincial requirements.
Second.
Discussion. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. Since we received this report, and I guess what I've been wondering is whether we want to consider whether there's an opportunity for us to allow the public to discuss the report more, or to engage, that sort of thing. And so I know that we talked about using this as part of our launching of the OCP. So I guess a question through you, Mr. Mayor, to staff is, would there be that opportunity through the OCP process for us to provide a wider opportunity to the community to get the highlights of the report and to ask questions and engage, or would it be best to have a separate event for that?
Through the Mayor to Councillor O'Keefe, the idea with that process would be integrated into the OCP review process. There would be a workshop, open house, all centered around housing and some of the challenges that the town faces based on the results of the report, and potentially, idea gathering, solution-oriented discussion, stuff like that.
Good, thank you.
Thank you. Any further discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Move to recommendation 3.
Thank you. I'll move the recommendation that the staff report dated October 29th, 2019 regarding the collection and future use of the town's community amenity contributions be received for information.
Second.
Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Now move to our advisory 10B, our advisory planning commission meeting, and we have the minutes.
I'll move receipt of the minutes.
Second.
Discussion, call the question. Motion carries. Thank you. With regards to recommendation 1, I'll recuse myself for that. I have a family member who's involved in with the proponent, and Councillor Rentoul will take over as chair for this motion.
Thank you. So we have a recommendation before council.
Okay, so this is with respect to development permit application number DP 100786. This is 10129 5th Street, which is adjacent to Roberts Manors. And the recommendation from APC, and I so move, is that the applicant for development permit application number DP 100786, 10129 5th Street, submit a revised landscape plan and planting list prior to this application being presented back to council, addressing design guideline number 20.3.35, incorporate additional indigenous and drought-resistant species to the satisfaction of the senior manager of current planning. 2, that the applicant address design guideline number 20.3.3, roof lines along the south and north elevations to the satisfaction of the senior manager of current planning. And 3, that prior to the issuance of building permit, the applicant shall pay to the town a deposit in the amount of 115% of the estimated cost to complete the hard and soft landscaping for the development, register a flood hazard covenant on the title of the property referencing the submitted engineer's report, register a private subterranean access agreement between the property owners of 10129 5th Street and 2433 Melview Avenue to permit the proposed encroachment of the developer's parkade, register a private easement allowing the driveway of 2433 Melview Avenue to serve as a shared driveway between the properties at 10129 5th Street and 2433 Melview Avenue, and register a private easement to permit the proposed encroachment of the pedestrian walkway and landscaping along the northwest interior side yard of 2433 Melview Avenue.
Second.
Thank you. Discussion? Seeing no discussion, I'll call the question. Oh, staff have something to point out.
Sorry, through the chair, I've just noticed in item 1 there that was read out, the wording starts out, the property owner submits a revised landscape plan and planting list prior to this application being presented back to council, addressing design guideline number 20.3.35, incorporate additional indigenous and drought resistant species, etc. From staff's point of view, that may have been an oversight in the drafting of that recommendation in the staff report. It seems an awfully minor issue to bring the application back to council again for your final approval given the small amendments to the landscape plan. So I would like to suggest that we remove the wording prior to this application being presented back to council and have it just read, the property owner submits a revised landscape plan and planting list addressing design guideline number 20.3.35 and then the details about the landscaping.
Thank you. I'll look to the mover and seconder.
In the APC discussion, there was no discussion about this having to come back to council. So the motion coming out of APC was in fact to make these changes, simply make the changes before dealing with the DP. So I'm happy to amend the motion to remove that phrase.
Thank you. The seconder?
Yes.
Thank you, staff. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Thank you. Motion is carried.
Thank you. So we'll move to R2.
Okay, so APC discussed the proposed amendments to bylaw number 2181, which is the membership of the Advisory Planning Commission, and that was something referred by council. And it was an interesting discussion. The recommendation coming out of APC, and I'll move it to get it on the floor, is that the proposed Advisory Planning Commission bylaw number 2181 be amended as follows: that item 5.14 be eliminated, and 5.15 be increased from 4 members to 5. And if I get a seconder, I'll explain.
Second.
Okay, so the proposal coming out of council that was referred to APC had some significant changes to the membership, so that we were requiring a planner, we were requiring somebody with a social housing type of background, and 5.14 was one of the members had to be 35 years of age or less. And APC felt that council was being too prescriptive and that flexibility was beneficial. The points that came up in the discussion, council has the discretion to appoint whoever they want. If we've got an applicant who's appropriate, who's 35 years or age or less, council can certainly do that. But if you put that requirement in and you get only one application in that age category, and it's not a particularly strong member, but you have a really good one who's 36, you may be eliminating somebody that would make a good member. And similarly on the professional qualifications, council by policy can advertise saying we're looking for people like this and encourage that kind of application. But at the end of the day, we would have the flexibility to appoint whoever we want. So their suggestion is keep the flexibility, don't lock in that age requirement, and instead of locking that age requirement in, just say instead of 4 residents at large, 5 residents at large. So that was the discussion that happened at APC, and it was almost unanimous.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. That all sounds good to me. I have a question about 5.4, and so it says, in the event that representatives cannot be appointed pursuant to 5.1, blah, 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 all those other things, then additional residents of the town will be appointed. And so I'm wondering, instead of having will, would it be better to have may, so that, again, maintaining our flexibility? So it sounds like if it's will, then we have to pick perhaps people from the list that maybe we don't think have the qualifications, but if we're required to appoint them, then we have to. Is that an issue?
So I'm sure staff could respond to this one, but we have to have the required number of members. So if we don't have any applications in those categories, and we choose not to appoint anyone, as in may, then we might not have enough committee members. So it really is a will.
Okay.
If we don't get people with these professional qualifications, we will simply appoint some additional members at large from the community to make sure we have enough members on the committee.
Okay. Thank you for those points. Any further discussion? I'll call the question then. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. And I want to thank APC for giving good consideration to those amendments and coming forth with an amendment. We're now going to move to the staff reports. We have 9 of them this evening. The first 11A is a request for proposal award for the Ray Creek Dam design.
I'll move the recommendation that the consulting contract for the Ray Creek Dam design be awarded to Kerwood Lytle.
Second.
Discussion. Councillor Fallon?
Just a comment to what was mentioned earlier in public participation regard to the look of Ray Creek. And for my part, I really don't see Ray Creek becoming a pristine, manicured environment. I see it much more to be something similar to Swan Lake Nature Reserve, that it stays as a little piece of wild within our town of Sydney. I think that would be an appropriate look. So that was just a comment to what was said earlier. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Garnett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a comment about the whole issue with Transport Canada. And I have to be honest, I'm becoming very frustrated with the whole thing. I just don't, I feel like they've acknowledged that the problem exists with them, lies with them. And it seems like they should be willing to be doing more, I think, to work with us as a town to get this stuff all done together. And I feel like they're not doing their part. I think for the community's sake, for the residents' sake, they should be putting more of an effort to work with us. And I think if that involves potentially reaching out to Adam Olson's office to send a letter if he's willing to Transport Canada. We'll have a new minister as of November 20th, I believe, is when the new Prime Minister is appointing his cabinet, the minister responsible. And I'm hoping that if we reach out to Elizabeth May, she is a really good resource in Ottawa for dealing with issues in the community. And she speaks directly with people, and people respect her and listen to her. So I would hope that we could maybe reach out to her office and have her put some pressure on the new minister to talk to Transport Canada and see if they can't be a little more willing to budge with this to get the work all done at once. I think it's for the best all the way around. And I just would hope, and even to the residents who live in the neighborhood, send letters to the new minister. Do it. Put pressure on it. That's what gets people to do action. They don't like it when people writing complaints and constantly do that. They will answer you. I've written letters myself, and they do get back to you. But I think if our powerful people in our community who have weight can do something to help us, I think they will. And I think if we reach out and ask them, I'd love to see this all be done at one time. And I think we can do that and get there if we get help. So thanks.
Okay. I have a comment, but I might ask Mr. Humble, did you wish to comment briefly on the negotiations and their to date and timeline?
Negotiations with Transport Canada, Mr. Mayor. So yeah, they've been ongoing, and certainly those discussions have been had, and we're encouraging them to work with us on trying to do this in 2020 as a single project. And we'll continue to do that. And they're not saying no, but they're saying there are challenges.
Thank you. And my comment to Councillor Garnett's point is that when Transport Canada did delay the project from the summer of this year, 2019 to 2020, and we were requesting confirmation at that time. This was late spring, early summer. We were requesting a commitment to doing the project in 2020, and we didn't initially get that agreement from them. I did approach Elizabeth May, and Elizabeth May did write a letter and walked it to Minister Garneau and Transportation Minister Garneau, and it went back down to the department, and we did receive a call, and they acknowledged that it is important to us. However, that negotiation continues ongoing, and we'll look for a favorable outcome. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the issue that really is stalling things somewhat is one of Transport Canada is concerned about safety of having two large construction projects going on at the same site. And that's not a completely unreasonable concern. However, we do feel that it should be possible to do this safely, and the town's willing to make some compromises in terms of choice of contractors and whatever, so that it's, if need be, a single construction company. The thing is that Transport Canada and in fact even our own staff can't fully evaluate the safety concern until the detailed design is done. So it really is critical for us to get on with that detailed design so that the safety issue can be evaluated, and if it isn't a showstopper, then we could reasonably put the pressure on. If you put the pressure on now, what you're going to get back from them is, we don't even know what the detailed design is going to look like. We don't know how far they're going to have to encroach, and so on. So, the challenge for us is we need to get on with this quite expeditiously. And there's a lot of additional information in here about cost estimates and so on, I would encourage us to still get on with it, because the detailed design is not actually a commitment for the full budget. And I think that the residents haven't got the full background of all the things that we're talking about. It's not completely fleshed out in the staff report. So I would like to see us award the contract for the detailed design, but I'd also like to see us give staff some direction to hold a public meeting on the latest information on the project, particularly so it's known to the residents, put out a media release, put out an update on the town's website. There is a bit too much to want to walk through the whole thing tonight, but I think there's so much new information here that we really do need to share it. So after this motion, I'd be prepared to make a motion to that effect.
If I could make two comments before going to Councillor Garnett. To Councillor Wainwright's point, in the report it indicates that if we do proceed with this detailed design report, it won't come forward to us until April. And by April, we hope to know from Transport Canada the specific details of the project going forward next summer. So time is important. We do need to proceed with this detailed design work for that timeline. And second is yes, with regards to the details, we appreciate the Ray Creek Residents Association, or the group of residents in that area. There's been good communication, I think, between the town and those residents, and folks like Bill Collins taking a leadership role, and similarly with Peninsula Streams and your group and that sort of thing. So while we appreciate that communication, we've tried to do our best. I think it's important, given where we are at this juncture, that in the early new year, that the motion with regards to public awareness and a public meeting, that we indicate that would commence early in the new year. Councillor Garnett.
Just as a point of clarification, I didn't think we should slow down. I thought we should go ahead with this as quickly as possible. And as to the point about the letter from Elizabeth May before, I just was trying to reiterate that this is going to be a new minister. And when you change governments and you change ministers, things can be forgotten or put down lower on the agenda. So I thought with the new minister, we should just keep the fire, lit, so to speak. So thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Humble.
If I can, Mr. Mayor, too, I just want to reinforce Councillor Wainwright's comments around, I guess, the town working with Transport Canada. So they have been very communicative on this, and they've been in communication with staff at various points. So from my perspective, they are waiting for the detailed design, and I think they haven't given us an indication that it's certainly not feasible to undertake the projects concurrently in 2020. They're indicating there's challenges, and I think that staff are optimistic that we can still work with them once we have the detailed design underway. So I just want a point of caution with respect to going out too strong with respect to Transport Canada, because they have been to this point they've worked with us well on this project, and we want to continue to do so for sure.
Okay, we appreciate that update as well. Any further discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? The motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We'll move to item 11B, use of proceeds of the sale of the Councillor.
Can I do the follow-up motion about so I'd like to move that we follow up by scheduling a public information meeting, a media release, and putting new information on the town's website about the status of the project. And I didn't mention timing of the public meeting to give staff flexibility.
Okay. Fair enough. I have had some discussion with staff, and early in the new year seems practical. So if staff is comfortable with that, I think it's important communication for the residents. So public awareness and public meeting. Thank you. So do we have
second that?
Yep. Discussion. Call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. We'll We'll now move to item 11B, which is use of proceeds of the sale of the fire hall parking lot lands, and we have a report dated November 5th.
I'll move the recommendations that council allocate $30,000 of the sale proceeds to cover legal fees associated with the transaction, that $900,000 be earmarked as funding for the remediation of the Ray Creek Dam, and that the remaining net proceeds be set aside to fund upcoming capital projects.
Second.
Discussion? I do have something, and sorry, Councillor Garnett, you go ahead. I do have a note here that I wanted to.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I do like the earlier proposal by a member of the public that it's a lot of money and maybe we should be asking the taxpayers what they want us to do with it. It's potentially something we should maybe consider. I'm also comfortable with putting more. I'm just a firm believer that when you have a large debt, and I believe financial advisors who say you should pay down that debt as quickly as possible. So I would not be against if anybody's proposed putting even more of the money towards the CSB debt. That's what I in particular would do, but that's my financial way of looking at things. I'd like to hear what other people on council have to say about it. Thanks.
Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the motion is actually referring this to the budget, and the budget is a public process. We actually advertise special budget meetings, and we're required to have public opportunities for people to speak and ask questions during that. So there is actually going to be a real opportunity for the public to give us input on everything with respect to the budget. And we're going to have a bunch of capital projects that we either are going to fund or borrow money for, or maybe not do them. But the public gets to weigh in on all this stuff. The $30,000 to cover the legal fees, that wouldn't go to the next budget. That would simply get done. But $900,000 being earmarked for remediation of the dam, that's a next year activity, or possibly later, depending. So that will go to budget. That's not a commitment to spend the money now. That's just an instruction to staff of in preparing the budget, earmark that funding for that purpose, and the remainder being set aside to fund upcoming capital projects. That funding those projects would be one of the elements in the budget, or putting it into the capital reserve. But I mean, really, there is an opportunity. And in fact, personally, I don't think it makes sense to go to the public and say, hi, we've got $1 million to spend, what do you think we should do with it, when we actually have a much larger budget process that we'd like to have them engage in. Like, I don't favor doing budget stuff in onesie-twosies. Like, if you're going to engage the public, engage them on the whole thing.
Okay, if I might speak to points made by Councillor Garnett and O'Keefe before going, or Councillor Wainwright before going to other councillors. I agree with what Councillor Wainwright is saying, but you'll recall when we had our discussion at a previous meeting with regards to the amenity funds, and that's when we had discussion about possible community engagement on the use of amenity funds sometime down the road. And I spoke at that time to the fact that we had funds in the land sale reserve already, and that we're not likely to be purchasing land with those monies, and so I would like to include those monies with other community amenity uses. And so by that remainder, $1 million plus, being set aside in the land reserve, if we were to proceed with that community discussion about amenity funds and land sale reserve, we could in fact be engaging at that time. But to Councillor Wainwright's point, we will be considering having budget deliberations and considering significant capital projects. We considered some 90 capital projects in the budget process this year, and we whittled it down to 85. We'll be going through a similar process through budget deliberations next year, and we did fund those capital projects from different sources. A question to staff just before going to councillors is if we could go to the back page of your report, Mr. Hissick, where you have the little box and chart that shows the legal fees, 30,000. We have a part of the recommendations that addresses that. In terms of the Stones Throw PMT, 27,000, we're not actually including that in a recommendation, but we are for the 30,000 and the 90,000. Should we include that?
Already been resolved previously.
Thank you. Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So I guess in terms of the recommendations, it's not clear to me that we were referring this to budget. I mean, so to the point that the public is going to get their say and that this is capital projects is going to be discussed at budget time. Because when we've had other things like this come forward in terms of amounts or proceeds, the motion has been let's refer this to budget discussions. So when I'm looking at this recommendation, I'm not seeing that that's the case. It reads to me that staff is looking for direction from us, not to refer this to budget, but that they're wanting us to make a decision on how to allocate those things for upcoming capital projects. So to me, it seems, unless I'm mistaken, that they're asking, are we going to, that amount remaining, that $1 million, it seems to me the decision is to allocate it to future projects or to allocate it to the CSB debt, is what I'm understanding. Is that correct?
Okay, if I may ask for, go ahead, Mr. Isick, but I have a clarification question to request as well. So again, on that page, right below the chart, it says staff are recommending that the remaining $1,019,000 be set aside in the land sale reserve to be used as funding for upcoming capital projects. In the third part of the motion, it says the remaining net proceeds be set aside to fund upcoming capital projects. Should that just indicate the land sale reserve?
That would be where it would be parked for the time being. And in response to Councillor O'Keefe's question, there are aspects of this that will be considered in the budget, but what I was hoping to, and what I have, I think, received tonight is that you're okay not to allocate any more to reduce the borrowing at this time. So the question here is, do you want to use any of the proceeds to reduce the borrowing, which will be covered in the next agenda item? And if you go with my recommendation, it would be no, leave the borrowing as proposed and set this money aside for future capital items that will come forward through the upcoming budget and beyond.
So I'll ask if any members of council have any comment with regards to the $7 million being allocated to CSB funding. Councillor O'Keefe?
Well, I don't have any issue with the $7 million going to the CSB. To me, the issue was not so much the $7 million, but with the amount remaining. So whether that $1,019,000 remaining, whether we want to put that towards the CSB debt, or we want to put it in the land reserve for future projects.
That's that's for our consideration right now.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah.
Okay. So if we choose not to do that, let's be clear that the money is going to be set aside in the land sale reserve, and that when the budget comes forward next year, and there are numerous capital projects, staff may or may not recommend that some of those capital projects have some funding from the land sale reserve. We don't know, but that's why we're parking it there. Councillor Fallot and Councillor Garnett.
Thank you. No, I'm happy with the way this is and leaving that $1 million for capital projects. As we see earlier in the report, we've got the parks concept plan, the Beacon Wharf replacement, Kenora Road improvements. We just had another request for sidewalk and road improvements on 8th Street. So if we take that $1 million and go to pay down the CSB, which isn't a bad idea, we're still going to need to borrow money to fund these projects, which some of them are necessary, such as the Beacon Wharf replacement, because there's a structural issue. but we've already heard from our community what do we want, so what they want. So I don't see any reason. It's not that I'm not looking for input. We already have input that these are projects that our community wants and needs. So I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel here. We've got input from our community, and I think we've got places to spend that $1 million. Thank you.
Councillor Garnett.
I think if you take the proposed allocations out of the mix, it's actually it's over 1.9 million. So if you don't go with those proposed allocations, you're dealing with $1.9 million, not 1.019 million. Can I ask through to staff, through the chair to staff, if we put another $1 million down on the debt borrow for the CSB, do you have an estimation of how much money that will save us in payments over the course of the loan?
Roughly about 50,000 a year, and that would be worthwhile if I wasn't convinced we were going to incur more borrowing for these other capital items. So that's why I'm recommending what I am.
Okay, thank you. I just put that out there for discussion purposes. I'm not necessarily leaning one way or the other. Just wanted to know for the rest of us to you know, because if you're saving money, does it offset what you might have to pay in the interim for other things? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And through to staff, then I would assume the same applies with respect to any spread in the rate versus the rate that's here now. So you're projecting some savings if we were to take this $1 million and pay down the existing debt, but we need to incur new debt at current interest rates. You're not seeing any incentive then in terms of doing that for a differential in rates in terms of what you'd locked in at previously and what's available now. I'm assuming that's correct.
The rate that's currently available is very favorable. It's probably going to be our lowest of the three draws. So I do wish to proceed in the spring 2020.
I believe in the report, that's the next agenda item, but the reference is around 2.5%. Thank you.
Any further? So just for clarification, for the benefit of the audience, so the next report, is it the next report? Is the security issuing, and so we will be issuing debt for $3 million, which is the last segment of the CSB. So really the option before us is, do we take this $1 million or slightly over $1 million, apply it to the debt such that that borrowing resolution was only $2 million instead of $3 million? And as we've heard from staff this evening, we could proceed doing that, but there could be implications with having to proceed with borrowing at another time, and it's at a favorable rate now, and so hence we have the staff recommendation. Seeing no further discussion, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. And we do now move to item 11C, which is the municipal security issuing resolution regarding CSB borrowing, and a report dated November 5th.
I'll move that council approve borrowing from the Municipal Finance Authority of British Columbia as part of their 2020 spring borrowing session, $3 million as authorized through Community Safety Building Loan Authorization Bylaw number 2111, and that the Capital Regional District be requested to consent to our borrowing over a 30-year term and include the borrowing in their security issuing bylaw.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor O'Keefe?
So support the motion, but I guess the question I still have is, when will we see a final report on the costs for this project and the reasons for the significant overrun? And I guess I'd like to, as part of that report, see some lessons learned so that council has a better understanding of some of the risks and pitfalls with major projects, and that maybe we can do a better job of planning, estimating, knowing that we have, it's just been stated, we have a number of big infrastructure projects coming up. So it would be nice to know what happened here for a project to go so over budget. And I still, as a council member, don't really understand that yet. And so before we embark on any other big infrastructure projects, whether it's Ray Creek or the pier or whatever, we got to understand what's been going on here and what can we do differently in the future to avoid overruns like that.
Okay. It does say at the top of the top page of the page in the second report is final costs are still coming in. So we have had a previous commitment from staff that they will produce a report once the final costs are known for the project. So your points are taken. Any further discussion? I'll call the question. Those in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We'll now move to item 11D, which is a request for proposal award for the pump station condition assessment and a report from staff dated November 4th.
I'll move the recommendation that the consulting contract for the sanitary pump station condition assessment be awarded to WSP.
Second.
Discussion? A couple of questions through to staff. There's language in the staff report that refers to condition assessment with regards to pump station or stations and planned upgrades. And a question I have is, while it refers to the Harbour Road pump station, how many pump stations do we have in Sydney, and is the condition assessment being done on all the pump stations or just the Harbour Road station?
Mr. Mayor, the assessment is being done on all the town pump stations.
And how many do we have? Is it?
We have 12. One storm and 11 sanitary.
Okay, thank you. That's my question. Any further discussion? I'll call a question. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. And we'll move to item 11E, which is changes to water meters in multifamily condo buildings. And we have a report from staff dated November 5th.
I'll move the, go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't going to actually make the motion, so if you want to do it to get a discussion started.
I'll move the recommendation that council direct staff to bring forward an amendment to bylaw regulations, bylaw number 2016, to require developers of multifamily buildings to install one appropriately sized water meter for the entire building. 2, that the change in standard for metering of multifamily building be applied immediately to new construction. And 3, the staff bring forward a budget item for 2021 budget deliberations to start retrofitting existing multifamily condo buildings to one appropriately sized water meter for the entire building.
Do we have a seconder?
Okay. Sure, yes.
Discussion. Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So the thing I guess I'm a bit uncomfortable about, and I don't see the information in here, is what we think the expected cost is going to be to do all of this retrofitting. And I know we can, do it over a long period so that it's not a huge amount of money, but we're embarking into something that is probably a long-term capital cost, and there is no estimate of how big that is or how many years this is going to take. The other thing that I'm wondering a bit about is whether there might actually be a third option, and I appreciate this may require some changes in our billing, but if there was a single meter at the to the building and they had individual meters inside, and you subtracted the total of the individual ones from the meter to the building as a whole, you would have the common use water that the strata could deal with however they wish, and the individual residents would have their own billing, which encourages water conservation, and that's actually why the previous council decided not to go with the single meter. I recognize that that would have the same full large capital cost, but it would also have all of the advantages of both options. And I don't know how much additional cost might be involved in that. I mean, I guess you have more meters to read. The other thing is that technology has been changing. When I first was on council, they actually had to go and read the meters, look at them, and over a period of time they switched them to this wand type of thing, so you only had to get near it. And now the technology is it's Wi-Fi, and you don't go out and read it at all. You know, a sensor on a telephone pole in the neighborhood reads all of them in a radius. So if we were going to start a significant retrofit, maybe we should be thinking about adopting new technology at the same time. So I'm kind of I'm interested in more information and not actually making a decision tonight.
Councillor O'Keefe and Councillor Duncan.
Thank you. So I'm of similar mind. So when I looked at this, I understood that it had been brought to council in July 2018. So together, I presume that there must be new information, but when I read the reports, they're basically identical. So I didn't see too much new from last time. The concerns that I have is that there's not enough information for me here to really say why this needs to be done. There's some references to additional administration and maintenance, but there's no information about how frequent that is, what the man hours involved are, or person hours, what the costs are. I'm concerned about moving to a system where there's less accountability for people and their consumption of water, especially now since a lot of the units in the condos that have been approved in the last little while, there's a number of 3-bedroom units, which wasn't the case before, so there's going to be a greater difference between units for that. I'm also concerned that citizens who currently live in condos, and this is something that the town currently covers in terms of the maintenance and the administration. If we go to a single meter, I presume that that's going to, they're going to have to pay additional costs through their strata. I would presume the strata is going to say, well, if we have to administer this and we have to send out bills and collect, then that will be an additional cost. And so I don't know if that's the case, but having some information from staff as to whether that's the case, I would like to know. It just seems, in some respects, I would think a multifamily dwelling, all the meters are in one place, and it would be easier than single family homes. So it seems like we're potentially penalizing people in multifamily dwellings. So I'd like to have some more information on that. Other things I would need to know about is the number of buildings that this applies to, and the number of dwellings, the number of buildings and number of individual dwellings, the estimated water loss and associated expense that currently takes place on an annual basis as a result of the existing meters. So there's no information for me on that as to what those costs are, and so why we need to do something about this. How those costs compare to single family dwellings, the estimated savings from water loss if we were to move to a single meter, the estimated annual savings in person hours and dollars if we move to single meter, what's the estimated cost to retrofit the meters and how long would it take? And as Councillor Wainwright mentioned, have we looked at alternative solutions? wireless. One of the issues mentioned in the report was sometimes it's difficult to access the meters. So I'm just wondering, why can't we tell developers to put them in a more accessible thing? Have we also considered things like perhaps grandfathering current buildings and making this a requirement for new buildings? I don't know. So for me, there's still a lot of questions that haven't been answered in terms of what's the business case to do this, and so I'd like to see that before we proceed.
Councillor Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think I was going to have basically the same comment as Councillor Wainwright about the third option. Looking into it, it seems like going back to a single meter would be going backwards from where it seems most municipalities are currently trying to go with regards to water efficiency and trying to reduce water use. I kind of went looking through our water files and found, okay, so our strategic plan demand curve suggests that at 1% growth rates, which is what the CRD is growing at, we run out of water in 2050. And if water use continues to decrease per capita by 1%, we run out in 2070. This assumes current climate with our rainfall remaining roughly the same. If we have a big drought, we start running out sooner. If we start getting more people immigrating to the area faster, we start running out sooner. That's not really counting the leach watershed. So I feel like moving backwards on a potential for saving water is a risk, a really substantial risk. Looking at submetering, we find it usually reduces household water use by anywhere from 15 to 42%. So it's substantial. The biggest water user is still irrigation and lawn use. So looking at actually putting in a single meter that makes buildings better account for the fact that they're still watering their lawns and their landscaping, and putting in the irrigation meters would still would probably be the best thing. So and mindful of staff talking about it's the time and the effort is difficult for them. I'd found that in several jurisdictions, though it might have been more in the States, they actually have that single water meter that goes to the building, and the town is responsible for that, and the building gets a bill just from that, and then breaking out the individual bills was up to the strata, so it reduces the town's time. The strata ends up taking it on, and I don't know if that's just perhaps it's a question through to staff if they've looked into that at all, about whether that fits within our municipal powers to kind of download those responsibilities onto the strata. But knowing that we already have infrastructure in some of these buildings and people are already expected to do this and it already lowers water use, I'd like to find another option before we open the floodgates, as it were.
Sorry, Councillor Duncan, could you clarify the question on that for staff to perhaps answer?
Well, whether, and this is from just, it was a report, the survey was existing literature and local case studies done for the Greenest City Scholar Program for Vancouver, and she'd mentioned in many jurisdictions, submetering policies are in place. Utilities bill the property owners a mass water bill based on the master meter reading, and it's the owner's responsibility to read the submeters and bill individual units based on the submeter readings. However, in that paragraph, she did not specify how many of those jurisdictions were in Canada or BC, and whether our municipality has the power to actually download that responsibility back onto the strata owners. So I guess it would be whether staff have looked into that at all.
Well, I think if from the report, with staff indicating going to a single meter, yes, the strata would be responsible for billing separately. The town would be just billing the strata or the rental building, and
they would continue billing the residents separately. As this is the part where it was unclear whether they would continue, whether they would just go back to doing, we bill to the building and they, it just goes back to, as Councillor O'Keefe was saying, each resident getting just a flat rate.
Well, say, take the example of new construction. If it was new construction, there would be no individual meters. There would be 1 meter of the water going to the total project, the total multifamily residence, and yes, it would be up to the strata to determine the billing for that. So the town does have that ability to operate that way. It's also indicated in the staff report that there are other jurisdictions who have gone to single metering at multifamily units. I'm not arguing in favor or for, I'm just trying to address or come to what your question actually
No,
is.
so our ability, so in the new buildings, they would continue installing individual unit meters. And then instead of staff having to continue reading the individual unit meters, they now read the building meter.
Okay,
And
I'll
the
let staff
residents,
clarify.
I can let staff clarify that. I'm just wanting to indicate appreciating that there is a motion on the floor. If it does fail, I mean, there seems to be a lot of questions that council does have and regarding this, and certainly one option could be to refer it back to staff for additional information to respond to some of the councillors' questions and comments regarding that. We can provide further clarification if council so wishes. But anyway, I'll refer the question to staff. If they want to respond, please.
Thank you.
I guess from a...
You just turned yourself off.
Thanks. I guess from an operational perspective, what we've got in the ground right now is a whole bunch of variety of individual meters that are out there. Certainly from staff's perspective, moving forward, we would like to see premise isolation at property line with a proper backflow prevention device in one single unit so that we have complete control over what can potentially come back into the public system from a private property line. So if we could move in a direction where any of the new builds, it's basically the requirement is a single meter. If we want to move ahead and have them do other separate meters for each unit, that's the potential that could happen as well. We don't really know exactly what we've got out there. There's residential buildings that have meters in each separate unit. There's other ones that have been newly built that'll have like a panel of meters in a room, in a mechanical room. That's a little bit easier to work with, but still we don't have a lot of control over what happens between those meters and that mechanical room and the actual where we demarcate property line on the street. So you get an aging infrastructure in a building, an apartment building or a condo building that's got a meter that's 30 years old, and it's in a suite in behind a hot water tank or a closet that somebody's built, and that leaks, and we don't have access to that building for whatever particular time. We have a device in there and we have no right to enter into somebody's abode to do a repair on that. That becomes problematic, especially as the system ages. It could be something as simple as staff knocking on the door to deal with a request and somebody tracks mud across a brand new carpet or a floor without having the proper releases signed by the homeowner to give us access to maintain that. Those are some of the issues that staff have concerns with. As we lose our mature staff who know different protocols and we get into young people, there's the chance for that to slip through the gaps. Again, technology is changing. Remote reads based on a tower on an antenna on top of the new CSB building. There may be the potential for us to do a meter read of the entire 4,300 meters in the town of Sydney in 20 minutes. That is a realistic approach that we could take, but it's probably costly as well, as we probably have to retrofit every device that we've got in the town. But moving forward, if we could do something for the new builds, that would buy us a little bit of time where we could research exactly what we have in the ground and deal with some of those other issues. The CRD cross-connection control bylaw, which has been in place for many years, they've been dealing with the most at-risk things, the commercial, the industrial, the marine, the waterfronts. They haven't got into scrutinizing the residential or the multifamily units yet, but that should be coming in within the next 3 to 4 years. A lot of those devices that are in play right now need to be upgraded, need to follow the standards of the day. Like there is an example, if an RP was in a building and it's a 4-inch diameter, it needs a daylight drain of 10 inches in order to handle that device if it fails or if it purges on the site. You can imagine what a 4-inch device letting go inside a building that didn't adequately drain could happen. So those are things that we worry about as we move into the future on some of the old infrastructure that we have in place. But we can't quantify that. Every one of your questions is quite valid. But certainly we'd like to move forward with our new builds and get something in place where we would have that premise isolation at the property line if at all possible. And that would buy us some time to look at the other areas and come up with strategies. And still, some of the new meters that we would look at, we would hopefully be able to see if they were adaptable to a radio read process. We could incorporate that so that we can look at future needs moving forward.
So a question then, a clarification question. So if we did proceed with new builds, the town would just install 1 meter at the property demarcation line, and it would then be up to the strata if they wanted to put in individual meters to and use that information for rebilling within the strata.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So they may or may not.
Yeah. One other comment about water loss as we look into it. The rule of thumb in the industry is once you figure out what you're billed from your supplier and what you're billing to your residents, once that differentiation gets into double digits, 10, 11, 12%, then you have a concern on water loss. If you're down below 10%, it's really not worth the effort to try and capture that loss. You're just spinning your wheels, and you're probably spending more time to look for a needle in a haystack. And so we're not at that double-digit threshold yet in the town of Sydney.
Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I really do appreciate the rationale that staff are putting forward and the potential of backflow into the town's distribution system is obviously one of the big safety issues. Because where the meters are in at the individual units, there's strata-owned infrastructure connected to our distribution system with no backflow preventer. So if something happens in the building, in their infrastructure, it potentially could be coming into our system. So I really do understand where that one is coming from. One of the challenges with this is that we also base our sewer billing on the water bill. So whatever we do with this will affect that as well. So what we'd be doing then is actually getting the strata to individually bill for the sewer use as well. And typically now we're seeing, we require some family-sized units in a multifamily. So you've got, 3-bedroom family units in the building, and we're typically seeing a lot of micro units. So the strategy of saying every resident gets every unit gets the same billing will be very bad, because that will have, the single person overpaying and the family of 3 or 4 paying the same. And that was one of the reasons why the town actually tied the sewer bill to the water use way back when, and this was like 20 or so years ago, because flat rate billing was very bad from a water use and water conservation kind of perspective. So in principle, I still like the idea of the individual users getting a bill that relates to their individual use, not the, their share of the condo as a whole. But I also recognize the trade-offs that staff are mentioning. The thing is that we don't seem to have explored whether there might be some other options in this to consider. And I'm just not comfortable at this point saying we're going to go ahead with this interim measure, because if we put in a single meter on new construction, it's a lot harder to then retrofit to individual meters than it is to take an existing building and say, and we're now going to add another meter at the property line. Because I mean, we could do that, and that is much less invasive to the building than the other way round.
Okay, do we have any other questions of Mr. Robinson? Thank you for that.
Appreciate
input.
your
We
comments.
appreciate that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so we do have a motion on the floor. If a councillor wished to make a referring motion, then that would take precedence over this. Councillor Wainwright?
I think that it doesn't seem that we should simply defeat this and then ask for information and potentially make the same motion later. So tabling it until we've got some addition, until staff have had a chance to answer some of these questions, I think would make sense. The only thing I'm a bit concerned about is there was a huge shopping list of questions, and I don't want to turn this into a master's thesis for somebody. So I'm not sure exactly what, like the motion to table until we get additional information seems simple, but probably not enough direction for staff.
Well, I mean, procedurally, whether we go with tabling or whether we go with referral, we could just refer this report back to staff for additional information. But to your point, in terms of clarification, I think one of the points that's come out with that, without addressing all of the specific questions, was really a bit more of a cost-benefit analysis. We appreciate there are costs to the way metering is currently done, and there would be costs associated with going to single meters, sort of things. So. Sort of that cost analysis would, without going through the laundry list of factors again, I think would be helpful to council, or helpful to staff. Councillor O'Keefe.
I guess as part of that, I'd also like to see some input from strata councils in terms of, I'd like to know how this is going to impact them and the additional costs that might be downloaded onto residents. Because it seems to me this is something that the costs of the administration and the maintenance is currently paid for by the town. And so it sounds to me like by going to something like this, we're moving more to the strata, which would then have to spend more time and potentially recoup those administrative costs, whether there's maintenance costs involved, I don't know. So I think that's another bit of information that I would like to have.
Council, what's your pleasure?
I'll move that we refer this to staff for additional information.
Second.
Okay, discussion. Just procedurally through to staff, we can make this referral with the motion sitting on the table. Previous motion sitting on the table.
That's right. Yep.
I'll call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. We'll now move to electrical vehicle charging stations. We have a report from staff dated November 5th.
To get this on the table, I'll move that that council directs staff to work with Sun Country Highway to develop an agreement for replacing and taking over ownership, including all operations and maintenance of the town's public EV charging stations.
Second.
Discussion, Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I'm actually going to vote against this particular motion. I will start out by saying that I own an EV and I do not use any of the public charging stations in the town. I have my own at home. The staff report is talking about moving to a pay system for the level 2 chargers, and I'm not aware of any other municipality in CRD that's doing that for level 2 chargers. Some do it for the level 3 chargers, and we have one, BC Hydro operates one level 3 charger in Sydney, and it's free. So charging for the level 2s and leaving the level 3 free really is going to seem odd. Plus, like I say, as far as I'm aware, we would be the first municipality in the CRD to charge. but that's actually not my greatest concern. The three largest or most prominent EV charging systems in BC, or networks, are ChargePoint, Flow, and Greenlots. And Sun Country isn't isn't a widespread system in BC. They do manufacture equipment, and I understand they're trying to build their network, but these other ones are already out there. City of Victoria uses Flow. Now, Flow, as I understand it, the system has to be Flow equipment, but ChargePoint and Greenlots take anybody's equipment, and they're pretty well established. And for people that use EVs, they will have RFID cards or an app on their smartphone that talks to a particular network. So that's why the prominent networks tend to be the dominant ones, because people don't want to add yet another app or another card for a network that doesn't have many charging stations in BC. I mean, they'll do it if there's one locally, but you know, it is a bit less convenient. And I'm not seeing anything in the staff report suggesting that staff actually shopped around and looked at what the other networks might do. So I'd actually like to see staff do that before we pursue an agreement with Sun Country.
Councillor O'Keefe.
Thank you. So similar comment to Councillor Wainwright in terms of the going out to look at other companies to see. I don't know much about electric vehicles and charging stations, but I do know that it seems to be a growing business. Petro-Canada, I think, is rolling out charging stations across the country. I don't know if they're the same type or not, but there seems to be more and more options. So would be more comfortable if we do decide to do something like this, to have done some research and looked at what some other options are. Other concerns for me were whether by starting to charge for this, how this aligns with our goals about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And I guess what I'm looking at is, I don't know how long these vehicles would be parked at one of these things, but is it reasonable that if they're parked there, I don't know, for a couple of hours, is that, so potentially they would pay $7 for parking at one of these while they're downtown? And meanwhile, people who drive gas-powered vehicles can park for free in Sydney. And so I guess what I'm percolating on is, yes, there is some costs in terms of the electricity, which it looks like we would pay for anyways under this particular plan. But I'd like to get more information about the costs and how much we would recover. And in the end, whether we want to absorb those costs and not pass them along to people using EV. So basically whether it's a good idea to start charging, and I'm not convinced that it is. I'd also like to see more of a long-term strategy for EV charging stations generally in Sydney. I know we're talking about 4, but I'm not sure if we've talked about how many more we might want, how e-bikes fit into this. I'm not sure whether that's something we would want to consider. So I think I'd like to see a more robust plan, a more research done, and information about other possible vendors and costs.
Thank you. Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to thank staff for the report and for taking a stab at this, because clearly it's something that is going to have to be addressed. And I think this is a good start to the conversation. I don't know that it's incumbent on staff to go out and do a great deal of research. I think a request for proposal from purveyors of these services, and we could find a lot of information comes to us. and we can make a choice in terms of the future of EV charging stations and which direction we want to go. So I'm not going to support the recommendations that are here at this time, but I'd encourage staff to look for an RFP process and bring back to council hopefully some alternatives that we consider, because clearly it will need to be addressed probably sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Seeing no further discussion, if council wanted to consider, we do have a motion on the floor, if we want to consider voting on that motion or making a referral.
Just as a point of order, you know, I'm not assuming that this matter is completely dropped. It's if we vote against this particular recommendation, in that it's clearly part of our strategy to look to you know, climate solutions, I feel it's going to come back to us. Is there a necessity to refer it back, or do we think it will return through the course of some of our strategic plan initiatives?
Well, I have an answer, but Councillor Wainwright?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think it is reasonable to give staff the instruction to put out an RFP. If we simply defeat the motion and don't give any direction, yeah, I'm sure they'll bring it forward eventually. And Sun Country may be one of the ones invited to respond to the RFP. The other three networks that I mentioned have got quite a lot of experience with operating municipal EV charging stations, including the kind of pricing structure. They, you know, do a bunch of these in BC. The flat rate per hour is not typically what you see happening. Like what I'm used to seeing is there's a transaction fee for plugging in, just kind of like with your credit card, right? If you know, the merchant's going to pay a pretty significant fee to the credit card agency for your 10-cent purchase. So there is a transaction fee, and then typically they're charging by the kilowatt, not by the length of time that you stay. But some of them actually basically jack up the rate. Like if you're done charging in 15 minutes and you stay for like 3 hours, the rate actually starts after you've overstayed by an hour. They start charging you quite a bit for parking. So the different networks have got different strategies for dealing with this kind of stuff. And if you put out an RFP, you might get some creative ideas we're not thinking of.
My two comments are that I favor a referral for the reason that the staff report came forward, or main reasons is the staff report came forward. Currently, there is no a time limit on these, and so it does create. We have had, I think, indications from members of the public that you know, vehicles are occupying these spaces a long period of time, sometimes overnight, and if these networks have different, you know, models or frameworks with which to limit that, I think that's one of the reasons we want to move forward. The other is, in the staff report, is we don't currently have the full expertise on staff for the repairs and maintenance and the replacement and upgrading of technology for these, and of course technology is continuing to improve, so I don't think we should necessarily look to becoming the experts on EV chargers for four chargers so I'm pleased that this report came forward. It's bringing forward two important things for consideration, but I would be in favor of a referral back, you know, looking for options or an RFP because we do want to move forward on this. Councillor Rintoul.
Sure, I'll move that the matter be referred to staff to issue an RFP for the operation and maintenance of the electric vehicle charging stations available for public use in the town of Sydney.
Second.
Further discussion?
I guess my only reservation with that is whether staff currently have enough input from us to go forward with an RFP. You know.
Well, let's ask staff. Have you heard enough from us this evening?
And
an RFP for the operation and maintenance. I'm not sure. I'm not sure what kind of response we're going to get with respect to an RFP for the operation and maintenance. And it might be a matter of putting out, instead of an RFP, for example, maybe a request for expressions of interest, to maybe give some more latitude to potential proponents to come up with some creative ideas about whether it's taking over ownership of the existing EV charging stations, as well as the potential maintenance of them as well. So that's a possible option. I mean, there has to be an incentive, right, with respect to why they would want to take that over, and are they going to be charging? Are they going to be looking at maybe an opportunity for leasing the actual space and from the municipality as an opportunity? I mean, there has to be some sort of business incentive for them to want to be able to do this. And the other option, of course, is us, paying for them to maintain and operate these charging stations as well. So I just want to put it out that maybe it's instead of an RFP, maybe it's more flexible in that it's an RFEOI.
I think that's a fine amendment if the seconder is willing to agree.
Okay, so we have the motion amended, friendly amended.
I guess what I'm still thinking, to me, there seems to be some underlying policy issues that we need to talk about in terms of, are we okay with starting to charge people $4 an hour? And I don't know that we've decided that. So whether that's something that would come back from I would like to see that kind of analysis done in terms of what are the potential costs. I don't know that we've made the decision in terms of policy that we're going to start charging people for EV charging stations. And I guess the other thing is in terms of, I sympathize with the issue about the maintenance of these things, but I note in the proposal from this, from Sun Country, is that their proposal would involve just hiring a local electrician to do the maintenance. So perhaps that's an option for us, rather than charging people $4 an hour to charge, because that's what I guess they need to make money, whether that's a cost that we would just absorb. So,
Mr. Humble.
So I am aware of at least one municipality that is charging right now. I think municipality of Esquimalt has a bylaw for establishing and I believe it's level 2. I could be wrong on that, but I know they currently charge. I don't know what the amount is, but I know it's based on an hourly rate for the use of the parking space. So I guess moving forward, if we're looking at an RFEOI, my suggestion would be is that council should at least be comfortable with the idea of possibly charging some amount for the use of an EV charging station.
And further to that, I guess staff would be looking to council to how we would evaluate the RFE or the proposals that come in, because I did talk to one of the companies that Councillor Wainwright mentioned, and they have a cost to install their own charging units, which is over $3,000 per unit. That would be an upfront cost, and then they would charge less for the user, and then they would have an annual fee for the management of it. So if you provide guidance of how these would be evaluated, because to me I thought, well, upfront costs, we probably don't want to do that. We'd rather have minimal cost upfront. So if council has some input on that, that would be helpful.
Councillor O'Keefe?
Just when I was doing some research on this, I came across grant programs that had been available through Natural Resources Canada, where they were funding the upfront costs for stations like this. Those programs are no longer accepting applications, but I'm wondering, now that we've had an election and that the environment is a significant concern, it seems, to this federal government, whether there might be programs coming up in the near future. So that's perhaps another option for us to consider.
I take staff's point with regards to parameters for evaluating proposals. I think we're in a dynamic situation now with where what we have is in terms of EV chargers is we have residents charging at their residences. We have local governments providing a service such as we're doing with 4 meters. We have BC Hydro with a level 3 charger, and they twinned that level 3 charger up by the adjacent town parking lot near the mall and between Mall and Mary Winspear. And now we have networks that it's just unknown to me, who are providing service to municipalities in terms of operating. As it's indicated in the staff report, Sydney was proactive or perhaps leading edge in terms of introducing charging stations in the municipality in the 4 stations. And at the time, we were willing to pay for these electricity costs with EV charging as an incentive to help, as it's indicated in the staff report, to incent people to purchase electric vehicles. As electric vehicles become more and more common, we have to ask the question: where is the municipality going to fit in between BC Hydro, private business, that's offering networks and other service, and paying using taxpayer dollars to pay for other residents' EV charging or electricity costs. So I think I think many municipalities who introduce this, we're looking at incenting, but we're at a point now because of maintenance costs, because of there's no cap on the length of time that people are parking in these stations, that we need to consider proposals. In terms of assessing them, I would look to consideration of, given that these take a parking space in each of the locations, should there be some lease factor, the fact that this space is being leased? Mr. Humble referred to that possibility elsewhere, where I think you mentioned it in one of the networks. And the other is that it should be cost neutral to us in terms of the costs that the town pay. We've done our job in terms of incenting and picking up the electric costs, but I don't think going forward we should be paying for this. I think the private sector is taking over. BC Hydro is involved. When is BC Hydro? If you go to the level 3 charger that's in the parking lot, they all already have a payment system built into the machine. It's just a matter of when they turn that on, and we don't know when that is, but presumably it's going to be at some point in the future. I can't see BC Hydro giving free electricity in the long term. So again, for guidance would be, do we get something back for the space that we're giving up in terms of these parking spaces, and is it on a break-even basis in terms of whatever the agreement is with the organization? Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think in terms of evaluating these, we should really be kind of looking at why are we thinking about doing this. So one of the key things is this issue of people staying too long. And the typical sort of etiquette is you're not supposed to be using the charger for more than 3 hours because you should be giving somebody else a chance. So a lot of places that I see, they actually have a sign saying there's a 3-hour charging limit. Concern for us is, of course, enforcing that in overnight. But if they are hooked up, to the internet, which they have to be if you're charging, and charging means a credit card or a membership, so you know who's there. There is the potential, if they stay for longer than they're supposed to, you could actually fine them. Like, you've got their information. So assisting us with dealing with that staying too long problem is probably one of the criteria that you'd want to look at in evaluating them. Because if you had 2 proposals that were similar and one was going to help you solve the problem, the other one wasn't, it would probably be a big factor. The cost neutral thing, these guys are in the business. Most of them are selling hardware. None of the hardware that we've got can respond to a credit card. So we'd be looking at new hardware of switching over, and they make their profit selling hardware or leasing it. So, I mean, there is something in there for them. In terms of it overall being cost neutral, obviously finance is a factor in evaluating it. One thing I should just comment, though, that the major users for EV charging stations are not residents of Sydney. And the reason I say that is most people who own an EV are in fact charging at home. The people that need to use them are ones who are commuting, for example, from the West Shore. And particularly in winter, because that's when they're using more battery than they do in summer, some of them may need to top up to be able to make it home comfortably, and they're going to want to top it. Now, those people, of course, because they need to, are obviously going to be willing to pay because they need to. But you know, what I suggest to you is that this is actually an alternative to commuting with a gas vehicle for a lot of people. We do have some residents who are, I'm going to use the word abusing it by topping up with, or charging with free power overnight. And you see some pretty high-end EVs plugged in overnight at Town Hall, and I don't think that's reasonable, because those are the kind of vehicles like mine that you typically only need to charge like once a week, and usually you should be able to do that at home. If you can afford a vehicle like that, you probably can afford a charger. I recognize there are some people who are residents of condos where the condos don't allow them to install their own, you know, charging, and that should be something you think about before you buy one. But anyway, so going back to it though, I think that if our main concern is, or a significant concern is that length of stay, that's one of the main criteria.
Thank you. Any further discussion?
Just in regards to the length of stay, is that something we could just add on to our parking contract? Or?
I think we should.
Okay. Move along.
Yeah, we've made the point for staff's consideration, I think. Further, call the question. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. We now have the parking lot lease agreement deadline extension and a report dated November 4th from staff.
I'll move that council approve an extension to the deadline for finalizing a lease of the future parking lot at 9837 3rd Street to December 18th, 2019.
Second.
Any discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. And we have the grant application for volunteer and composite fire department equipment and training, a report from staff dated October 29th.
I'll move the recommendation that staff proceed with the Community Emergency Services grant application for volunteer and composite fire departments training and equipment to purchase new firefighter turnout gear and rapid intervention equipment for Engine 2.
Second.
Any discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. And 11I is our monthly building report for the month of October.
Move receipt for information.
Second.
Discussion. I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. We'll now move to correspondence. Item 13A is Central Saanich Recreation Needs Assessment. A motion was passed at Panorama Recreation Commission to forward to us, and we have a recommendation.
Move receipt.
Discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Sorry, did you have a comment, Councillor O'Keefe?
Yeah, I don't know if anybody has an answer to this, but I just, thank you. I have persons with disabilities on my brain lately, and so I'm just wondering if we know whether there was any consultation with that group in terms of their needs for recreation in the preparation of the report and in the I didn't see it in the engagement, so I don't know if that was considered. Do we know?
I don't know off the top, but
Okay.
But having made that point with myself and Councillor Rentoul sitting as commissioners on the commission, we'll certainly
Sure.
Keep that in mind.
Yeah. Okay.
Councillor Wintour?
I do know there were separate undertakings with respect to, facility users with mobility issues, as an example. In this case, this was really just designed to look at the needs of Central Saanich as a whole, taking into consideration any challenges a user may or may not have. So this report was not, targeting that particular aspect of recreational service. It was looking at Central Saanich and an overutilization of the existing equipment room in particular, the workout room at Panorama in particular, and trying to address that issue. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll now call the question. All in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. Move to item 13B, the proposed amendment to CRD Regional Growth Strategy, a referral letter from CRD dated October 23rd.
Move that we refer that to staff for comment by the deadline.
Discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We're now moving on to bylaws, and we have 14A, which is bylaw number 2182, Council and Committee Procedure, Amendment number 2.
Move introduction of the bylaw.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor Garnett.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate what I've said when we first were passing this, and a speaker at the public participation mentioned it as well. The concern for people that work out of our area that want to come and speak to us at public participation and public hearings, moving the meeting forward in time so that they're possibly not able to get here if they have a 9-to-5 job and say they work in in the western communities or something like that. And I wouldn't want to deprive even one person of the opportunity to speak to us if they so choose to. So I won't be supporting it again. Thank you.
Councillor Duncan?
Thank you. And I said this last time this was introduced, but I'll reiterate it, I guess for the benefit of the public who came forward, that I said at the time I was in favor of moving it forward because I don't know many people who have a 9-to-5 job anymore or an 8:30 to 4:30. And of those that do, and they have set hours, they are typically in kind of a white-collar professional job where if you say, I would really like to go to my local council and speak at this meeting, can I leave early today and make the work up later or bring the work home? It's the kind of job you're able to do that. The kind of people who are not going to get permission to leave early because they can have the kind of hourly wage or shift work or something like that where that kind of work arrangement is not allowed. You are paid for the work you do because you're a barista or something. They're working strange, irregular hours anyway, and whether it's 6 p.m. or 7 p.m., the likelihood of it being part of their being in the gap that they're able to make is pretty low. With regards to people with families making it, 40% of our families, according to our housing needs assessment, are single families. So the likelihood of them making it at 6 or 7 p.m. after deciding to hire a babysitter for the privilege of, or single parent families, for the privilege of coming in seems low. That their actual barrier to coming to council meeting is the fact that there's not childcare, or they're going to have to bring their child with them. And even in situations where they're not a single parent family, they're probably similar to me in that the other one isn't going to get home until after they've had to leave anyway, regardless of whether it's 6 p.m. or 7 p.m. Again, it's the difference in the hours that people are working. I can think of people who maybe have dock worker jobs or trades workers jobs where they're working 10 hours or 12 hours, and again, it's a larger time. So the number of people who are probably not going to be able to make a 6 o'clock meeting, but could have made a 7 p.m. meeting due to a conflict of family or work is, I think, going to be vanishingly small, and that the reasons those people can't make it due to work or family commitments is not due to the time, but due to the fact that it's evening, or they can't afford or don't want to afford the childcare. So if we're concerned about limiting people's participation, we might need to do what other councils have done and start looking at childcare provision. I don't know how many people in Sydney would take us up on that. We're such a smaller municipality, but I would think that would be the main one.
Councillor O'Keefe?
So I'm not in favor of the motion, even though I seconded it, just to get the discussion going. And for reasons that have been expressed before about if it's going to make things a little bit easier for people to get home from wherever they work and get here for 7, I'm in favor of that. I don't know why we would, you know, I mean, it's more convenient for us and for staff, but, you know, talking about people with white collar jobs, I think we're making some pretty broad presumptions about what people's experiences are. So I had a pretty good job with the government. I didn't get time off to attend council meetings. If I wanted to attend council meetings, I would have to take, you know, vacation time. There's no special, you know, permission to go to council meetings, so I'm not sure what that's all about. So I think if there's any chance at all that it's going to make things a little bit easier for people to get here for 7 o'clock, I'm all for that. If it means I have to be here a little bit later, you know, many of us ran our campaigns about we're here to listen to people. We want to do more community engagement. So I don't know why we are erecting a potential barrier. You know, we didn't hear anything from the community to bring this forward. This came forward on our own initiative. We didn't have a mass of people contacting council to say, you know, you guys should consider changing your times. So I'm happy to leave council meetings at 7 o'clock.
Any further comment? I'll weigh in for a moment, and that is, for some time now, I don't know how many years, we've had committee of the whole meetings at 6 p.m. on Monday evenings, and alternately we've had council meetings at 7 p.m. on the other weeks. And my experience prior to sitting on council and now over the past year in this chair is that we've had a great range of items come on committee of the whole agenda. And we do see, sorry, I'm going to start off by saying we have a limited number of regular members of the public who attend council meeting at 7 p.m. It's less than 6. There's 6 or less that attend on a regular basis. When we have committee of the whole meetings at 6 p.m., many of those same people are here at 6 p.m. So are we going to get additional people coming? If we're not getting them at 7 o'clock now for council meetings, in terms of regular people, why would we get, and we're getting them at 6 o'clock for committee of the whole meetings, I don't see it being a deterrent by having committee. For one time, people coming one time to a council meeting or a committee of the whole meeting, they are making arrangements. We do see a wide range of members of our community attending items at committee of the whole that happen at 6 p.m. We've had some full houses for some meetings. And so I think people are, by and large, able to make arrangements to come to a single meeting where something in their neighborhood or something important to them in the community comes forward. So I don't see that we're actually, based on the experience we have at 6 o'clock now and 7 o'clock now for our 2 meetings, I don't think we are going to be significantly limiting the participants at our meetings. And so I am in favor of that aspect of these procedural bylaws. Any other comments? I do have a couple of other comments on other aspects of this, and this is a question through to staff. On page 2, under 12, order of business, we have had discussion and we've reordered the items from 1 to 20 there. A question is number 14 is other reports. I can't recall in the past year us having other reports, and what might they be? We have mayor's report, council reports, committee reports, staff reports. I'm just wondering what other reports might ever come under that.
Yeah, thank you for that, Mr. Mayor. Actually, nothing, from a staff perspective, nothing comes to mind.
Okay, I might suggest we exclude that. I guess it would take an amendment given that we're giving this readings now. And the second is, nope, that question is answered. The third, I'd like to turn all members of councilors' attention to page 2, number 18, councilor reports. And what it says is under 18A, it says any member may provide a verbal report for information to council under this section of the agenda. And we have that common at our meetings. We also have written reports, and this evening we had 2 written reports. So I would like to amend that to say any member may provide a verbal or a written report for information to council. So that's a suggestion. If we go to 18B, a member who wishes to bring forward for council's consideration new matters shall provide a written report, including any background documentation and a motion to the corporate officer by 4:30 p.m. on Tuesday prior to the council meeting. So that's separate from A, where we're giving verbal or written reports under council reports. This is something separate, and that would go under new business. Okay, so because you're as a council member, because you're providing your information and you're providing your motion, your background information and your motion, at the same time that the staff are putting their reports forward to the agenda, there is time for the public and council to consider that, and so it would be considered under new business. Then we have item 18C, which is a member who wishes to bring forward any new matter that is not on the agenda shall proceed as per a notice of motion. And so it's not in our agenda package, and I apologize for not making copies, but I have a copy here under notice of motion. And it says any member may give okay, and I think that's clear. So really what I'm doing is I'm just requesting the amendment under the member under 18A to include a written report. But I just wanted to clarify the different ways that council will bring information, council members will bring information to council, either through verbal or written reports, either for background information and a motion that goes to the agenda, or for notice of motion. Sorry, the point I wanted to make was, and this is a question through the staff, is tonight we had a late item, or we have a late item that we agreed to add to the agenda under new business. Is that currently covered in our procedural bylaw? Council and committee bylaw. Sorry, I have a cough. Sorry, it is under, it's under, on 14A under 11, late agenda items. Council may by resolution place urgent items on the agenda at the time of approval agenda. Sorry, I've answered to my own question. In the staff report, 14A, on the front page, down at the bottom under 11, late agenda items. Sorry, I was looking for it before and I just didn't see it.
Bottom of the first page.
So under the actual bylaw?
Section 11.
Section 11. Okay, would a Councilor Enright?
I was going to suggest that we deal with first reading, and then we could amend the bylaw and debate it in the second reading.
Okay, I'll call the question on first reading. All in favor? Motion carries.
So I'd like to move second reading with an amendment to 12 order of business, deleting section 14, other reports, and an amendment to section 18A by submitting, including and written in front of report.
Do we have a seconder?
Second.
Discussion? I'll call the question. All in favor? Motion carries. Opposed? Okay, sorry, we have one opposed. Motion carries.
And then I'll move third reading.
Second.
All in favor? Opposed? We have 2 opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. So we have item 14B, development variance permit application number DV 100285, which is 10379, 10383, and 10387 All Bay Road, to retroactively approve the construction of 2 sets of beach stairs and the alteration of an existing set of beach stairs.
I'll move the recommendation that the application be approved.
A second.
Okay, just a comment that no submissions were received as of Wednesday, November the 6th. Any discussion? Sorry? I'm sorry, I meant to update that to say that we did have 2 reports, or 2 letters received as late items that all councillors received before the meeting this evening. Any discussion? Councillor Duncan and Councillor Garnett?
Thank you. I'd just like to, as you mentioned, we did have 2 late items. One of the late items appears to be a petition that was written by the proponent themselves that they then had various neighbors sign as a petition, including 4 times the proponent himself, which I'm going to say doesn't count as a submission in my estimation. And the other one, regretfully, again, there's just misunderstanding about what we're able to approve and not allowed here. Again, this person is concerned that they were allowed to construct within a required setback line. And that's not what the issue is. The issue is not that they were allowed to construct there. The issue is whether they were allowed to construct these non-permeable stairs versus a permeable set of stairs. And the reason that there is a problem with them building a non-permeable set of cement stairs versus a permeable set of stairs is not having to do with the environmentally sensitive area regulations. It has to do with how that then influences how that then influences the BC building code, the definition of what a structure is. So if it was a set of stairs that were made of stone, they would still be building a thing in the lot line, within the setback. However, by building something made out of cement instead, it now changes and becomes the definition of a structure. Not that it's stairs, but that it is a structure, and now building a structure within the setback line is a problem. Did I screw that up? Too much stuff. So I keep regretting that I keep having to approve this, because it is not a matter of protecting the environmentally sensitive area. It's merely a technicality about the definition of what a structure is. And they would still be allowed to build stairs. They would simply be stairs that looked different. So regretfully, this cannot change my decision.
Councillor Garnett.
And sort of for that same reason, I can't change my decision, because the rules are the rules. And for me, it's not about whether you think it's just about a structure or permeable or non-permeable stairs. We have those rules in place. This is an experienced developer. They chose to do it anyways, and I fully believe that they knew the rules. And now we're allowing them to go back, not to go back and fix what they've done. We're allowing them to go ahead and have this for a minor. I'm not sure if there was a minor penalty, but it just, for me, sets a bad precedent in the community for other developers. We've laid the groundwork. If you want to put in something, you don't apply for the variance, we'll do it. And if it's in an area where we think it might cause more harm, go ahead and do it that way. And it worries me that we're going along this line and allowing this to happen. And for me, it's bothersome, because it sets up a whole thing, and I can see this happening again, and us being back here in the same position, saying, do we make these people take the stairs out, along this particular area? I just can't support it. I don't see the reason we should. So, thank you.
Any further discussion? We have had deliberations on this a number of times, so I'll now call the question. All in favor? We have 4 members in favor. Opposed? We have 3 members opposed. That motion carries. Now move to item 14C, Development Variance Permit Application Number DV 100286 and Development Permit Application Number DP 100796, 95 70 and 9574 5th Street to relax requirements for retaining walls in order to construct a 4-story 16-unit multifamily residential development. And we did have so just a total of 1 residential, or did we had more than 1? We had 3.
There were 2 late ones.
Yes, we had 1 in the council package and 2 late items, and we have recommendation.
I'll move that DV 100286 be approved and that DP 100796 be approved, subject to the conditions as per council resolution number 2019.37.507.
Second.
Discussion? Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wanted to speak to 2 of the items of late correspondence. So one of them is arguing that the development's too big because there's a requirement to go to the 0 lot line, and that's what this variance is for. And the building, with the exception of the retaining walls, completely complies with all the setbacks. So if they weren't going to do retaining walls, they could do that development exactly as designed. And if they don't do retaining walls, they would simply slope the change in grade and probably stabilize it with riprap, big boulders, and it would look horrible. And they wouldn't need a variance because it's not a structure. But if they're doing concrete retaining walls, it is a structure and they need a variance. And I think it'll actually look a lot better for the neighborhood to approve that variance and let them do it. It's not that the building is too big going to a 0 lot line. The building is in fact completely conforming to the setbacks. There's also in one of the letters a suggestion that the OCP didn't envision this and that it should actually be a townhome development. And the OCP has a multifamily designation, which could be a range from a townhome through to this kind of development. It's the zoning that actually does it. The thing is, when the zoning was put in place in 2012, they did put in place the zoning for this kind of development. There's a different zone for a townhome development of a smaller scale, and the council of the day didn't pick it. So this is in fact consistent with what the council of the day envisioned when they put the zoning in place. It isn't a departure from what was envisioned. So those were the only 2 things I was going to comment on. We've gone down this route, and we recognize that the neighborhood doesn't want it. And in fact, I think the majority of council doesn't really want it, but the zoning is in place to allow it. And with the exception of the retaining walls, it's fully complying with everything. So in my view, it's reasonable to let it proceed.
Councillor Garnett?
I won't reiterate too many of the points that Councillor Wainwright has made because he's bang on with what I've been thinking. For whatever reason, in 2012, that's the way the council of the day decided to go. I'm not sure if the residents in the neighborhood were aware of what was happening, if they had a chance to have input, if it would have changed their minds at all. It's hard to say, to go back 7 years and determine what might have happened, what could have been. It doesn't fit the neighborhood, the character and form. I agree totally, and I feel the neighbors' concerns because they're echoed a lot with me, but the proponent, the developer, and the designer have done everything they're allowed to do, and they've followed the guidelines that they were given, and they follow them in good faith, and they've done nothing wrong here. So there's nothing we can do to penalize them for something or a decision that was made previous. They've followed the rule of the law, and they've done their best to incorporate what they think is best for the neighborhood. So unfortunately, it's with regret, but I'm going to have to support the motion just based on that. Those are the rules that were established 7 years ago. Thank you.
I'd like to make comment. I'm going to oppose the recommendation. When this first came forward at the first committee of the whole meeting, I opposed the recommendation. It did pass by council to go to APC. But I opposed the recommendation on the grounds of not granting the variance on the retaining wall setbacks. And while it's gone through a lengthy process, and while I give credit to APC for making recommendations, I give credit to the proponent for taking revising the building and taking that to APC and addressing some of the concerns that were expressed at council. To my mind, the retaining wall setback issue that I raised at the very first meeting has not been addressed. It's been addressed to the point that it is now a stepped retaining wall, but there is still a zero lot line for the start of the retaining wall. And so I have to think, and I do recall that in the staff report at that first meeting, it indicated that one of the reasons for considering the variance on the retaining walls is perhaps issues with drainage. But I'm looking at it from another perspective, and that is, what if there were no variances for the retaining walls? So there would still have to be retaining walls versus residences at the required setbacks. And those required setbacks are on the north and the south sides of the property, 4.5 meters from the lot line. And on the west side, 5.5 meters. So we're giving setbacks of 4.5 meters on two sides and 5.5 meters on one side. That is very significant. And if it's one thing we heard in the prior term was concern from residents over giving variances of different types of variances and the impacts that it has on the neighborhood. And this is going to have a significant impact by 4.5 meter variances, 4.5 and 5.5 meter variances. So what if you did not grant the variance and they had to have the retaining walls at the required setbacks? Well, they wouldn't be able to put in the required parking for the number of units that they're proposing in the 4 stories. Because quite frankly, what's going to happen is with the setbacks being extended, they're actually able to meet their parking requirement. So one of the things that we do not see in this proposal is, while there is a request for a variance and council has deeply considered that variance, there is really nothing back from the proponent getting that variance. And I would suggest one of the things that they could give back to the community over the concerns in the neighborhood and the community at large is one less floor. Yes, it's permitted under the zoning, but the variance on the setbacks is not permitted in the zoning. So I will be opposed to it and go to Councillor O'Keefe and Councillor Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I was also opposed to this variance from the beginning as well, but was willing to see what APC and others had to say. I haven't been happy with this from the beginning. I don't think it in terms of the OCP, despite what we heard initially, that it fits a need for the type of housing that we require in Sydney. It just doesn't. It's more high-end units, which we know we're oversubscribed for anyways. It doesn't fit in with the neighborhood. I've always been concerned about the impact it will have on Talista Park and the art gallery across the street in terms of the parking. And just from what we've heard about, residents and how I think this is going to have such a significant impact for them. And so for those reasons and others that the mayor has presented, I will also be opposing the request for variance.
Councillor Wainwright.
So I think I said this earlier, that they could proceed with the building exactly as is without the retaining walls. And I'll remind council that there was a townhome development at the corner of Orchard and 5th Their FCL was 4.25 meters. The average grade was 2.7 roughly before construction. So they needed to go up about 1.5 meters, which is pretty similar to what is the issue with the Rise development. And they did not put in retaining walls. They sloped it and they used riprap. And they did landscaping and stuff to pretty it up somewhat, but it's actually fair, in my view, not as nice as the retaining walls being proposed. Thing is, if you deny the variance, the proponent is most likely just going to go back and do that. Slope it and stabilize it with riprap. And I'm sure they'll improve the landscaping to make it attractive so they can sell the units. But it's going to be exactly the same building. The only difference will be the appearance of that increase in grade. So I can't see why the proponent is going to agree to losing an entire floor when he's got an easy solution that he can go to. I think this one is not going to work for the neighborhood, and I don't think it's going to come out as well for us in terms of the overall appearance, and we're still going to have exactly the same building.
I don't think we're going to have exactly the same building, because if they are not setbacks on the retaining wall, they can't meet the parking requirement. And so they're either going to have to pay in lieu or request a variance. There is parking for the residences in the varied setback area. There's driveway and parking area. Any further discussion? Councillor Garnett?
Through you to staff. You're shaking your head. I'm just curious as to the mayor's point. Can you validate that, or like I'm mulling over what he's having to say about, would that in fact be the case?
Through the mayor to Councillor Garnett, it would depend on the design that is proposed. If they eliminate the vertical retaining walls and replace them with riprap, as Councillor Wainwright indicates, that would result in a bit of an angled slope, and it would not be considered a retaining wall. What impact that has on the available space for surface parking remains to be seen, and that would require a redesign. One issue is the accessibility ramp for pedestrians to access the main floor of the building, and how that would be accommodated on the site. There's ways to design around any challenge. It just remains to be seen how that would be done.
Thank you.
Any further discussion? Councillor Duncan.
Well, thank you to the mayor and for Councillor Wainwright for this, again, difficult discussion right at the last minute after having seen this proposal several times before. Everybody loves a nail biter. I'm just wondering, I am taking the mayor's points, but I'm also wondering, when it comes to the profitability of the building, whether they would give up the floor simply because they would have trouble with the parking, as you're suggesting, or whether they would find another way to fit the parking on the site and redesign with the riprap. And that's, I'm worried that it wouldn't be the building and shorter, and because they would have to give up 4 spaces or something. I can't imagine them letting 4 parking spaces get in the way of the profitability of the development itself when it comes to the additional floor, which is why I am kind of leaning in the direction of, I suspect they would simply do what Councillor Wainwright says that they would do. Just knowing what the land prices are and the likelihood of them doing that, but changed my mind.
I'll go to staff for a moment.
Just to provide some clarification on a comment made about the option of paying in lieu for parking spaces that are not able to be provided on site, that would require a variance in this location since it's outside of the payment in lieu boundary area, which is right around the downtown core.
Okay, so it would, if the parking requirement could not be met, it would require a variance. Okay. Councillor O'Keefe?
I guess just one final comment in regards to what the developer might or might not do, and we don't know. What I do know is this: is that the current structure as planned is something that residents have voiced vociferously that they're not happy with it. There's a number of issues with it, and it sounds to me like the developers would need to come back to us anyways with if there's going to be a redesign. So I'm willing to to deny the variance now, and I guess we would have to take our chances in terms of whether they actually do what Councillor Wainwright says, or whether we have an opportunity to see something else that is works a bit better for that neighborhood. So I would rather err on that side and take the risk and see that we can come up with something better for the neighborhood.
Councillor Fallon.
Thank you very much. Right from the beginning, when this proposal came before us, we were hearing that the type of housing that this was going to provide was high-end housing. And even before we got the housing needs assessment, we knew that the type of housing that we don't need more of is the upper end. So not only are we getting a building with condos that is geared towards a market that is already in oversupply, we are getting a building that, although in and of itself it has attractive aspects to it, it is sitting out highly exposed and looks out of place. Yes, other surrounding properties, when they get redeveloped, will need to deal with flood levels and will be raised to compensate for that. But we've got a building that is 4 stories high that is really contrary to what our feelings are. So I think, yes, the developer has the option to come back and make whatever modifications, that he doesn't have to ask for amendments. If he's running into parking issues, that's another thing. But I think I'm going to, at this point, deny this application on that ground, because the building really is not one that our community at this point needs. Thank you.
Councillor Rintoul.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you for your observations with respect to clarifications on setback. I do note back to the early discussions and presentations by the proponent that neighbors to the west, to the north, had all been in favor of the development. Those are the immediate properties, and so I don't understand that, frankly, given the concern from other residents. I think it's unfortunate, oddly, that the third lot immediately to the south, which is not part of this development, wasn't included, and I'm assuming the developer tried to procure that lot because I think that would have added some depth to the project. It might have actually enhanced its aesthetic look and enabled the developer possibly not to have to go as high as they intend. Like my colleagues on council, I think we've all, as has been noted, looked at this and sort of reluctantly shrugged and said, we're going to have to accept it because of something that happened back in 2012. And I don't know that this developer, if this variance is not granted, would walk away and look at doing sort of the easiest solution here and come up with a development that's unattractive. They know what this market's like. They know it's a tough sell in this market, given the amount of inventory that we anticipate here in Sydney for this type of housing. I think as a reputable, credible developer, they would go back and want to come up with something that makes sense for the community, having heard the feedback throughout this process, but also for potential buyers, and whether or not riprap's the only option, I don't know, but I don't know how that would resonate with their buyers either. And so this discussion has certainly given me pause for thought with regards to this variant permit application. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Garnet.
I have to concur with Councillor Rintoul, as I spoke earlier, and now having heard everybody else with their input, I think I'm even more perplexed, if that's even possible. Yeah, it's food for thought. Like, there's so many angles to this. I to be honest with you, I didn't look at it from the angle that the mayor brought forward, so that's given me also pause to think about that perspective. So this is tough.
Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? One in favor, opposed? We have 6 opposed. Motion is defeated. We'll now move to new business. 15A, we have the youth transit passes. We had a referral from council on August 12th after discussion and receiving a letter from the District of Saanich. We passed a motion waiting the draft minutes of the Victoria Regional Transit Commission meeting of August 13th with regards to a pilot youth transit pass project, and we have a recommendation. Sorry, Mr. Humble.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. Just in respect to the last item, so the motion to approve was defeated. I'm just wondering whether or not it's prudent to have a subsequent motion to deny.
Sorry, can you restate that?
The motion to approve was defeated. Okay?
Yes.
So I'm just wondering whether or not it's prudent to make a motion now subsequently to deny.
Okay, understood. Councillor Reiner?
So there are two things going on. One is the development permit, and the proponent has paid a fee, got an application pending. If we deny the development permit, he'll have to apply yet again to put forward anything. We can deny the variance, leaving the development permit application still open, but then I guess the expectation would be that the plans can't be completed as submitted, and we'd be essentially referring it back to the proponent to do a redesign if they want to pursue their development permit. But it just seems to me that in good faith, we should leave the development permit application active. If council wants to deny the variance permit, and certainly the majority has not wanted to approve it, so it would make sense to do that. So I'd suggest one of the members who voted against it make that particular motion.
Okay, just for clarification from staff, so to Councillor Wainwright's point, a motion to deny the variance would leave the permit application open, and we wouldn't require a subsequent motion with regards to the application.
That's correct.
Thank you.
So you're looking for a motion? I will move that development variance permit application number DV100286 be denied.
Second.
Discussion. Call the question. All those in favor? 6 opposed? Sorry, 6 in favor, 1 opposed. The motion carries. Thank you, Mr. Hummel. Okay, we'll come back to item 15A, if the youth transit passes.
Move receipt.
Second.
Discussion? Call the question. All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. We now have item 15B. So Councillor Rentoul will, sorry, you have a new business item.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you to my colleagues on council for supporting the prospect of bringing this forward as a late item. I appreciate it. I'll read the motion that I proposed. Whereas a labor dispute between School District 63 and QP 441 has entered its 3rd week, and whereas students in our community have been unable to attend school during the strike action, and whereas the two parties have been unsuccessful at finding an agreement, I move that Sydney Council write to the Minister of Education, Mr. Rob Fleming, and urge the Minister to appoint a mediator with an aim to reach an agreement between the parties and reopen School District 63 schools expeditiously.
So before we have a seconder, I would like to have a council motion to approve considering this, or council deliberating on this matter this evening, as it's a new item. So once we have that, if we have that motion in favor by a majority, then we can proceed with the...
So moved.
Second.
Discussion. All in favor? Motion carries.
And now I'll second it.
Okay, Councillor Rentoul?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think we heard earlier this evening from one member of the public who expressed their heartfelt concern with respect to this matter. I will echo that concern. Students have been unable to attend school as a result of the strike. This has created stress and hardship on members of our community, and I believe it's incumbent on the provincial government to be party to the process. And I feel that as one school district in the province, that we haven't had voice that's resonated with the province to get involved, and we haven't had a mechanism to see some municipalities be able to stand up and express their concern on behalf of their residents. And so as a result, I would urge my colleagues to support this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Garnett.
I do feel for the residents in our community and their children, especially those that are approaching graduation. I have children who have gone through the system. I know what this is like. However, I also fully respect collective bargaining rights and the rights of unions to strike. And in this particular situation, although it seems very difficult on those in the community and their children, it's only actually in the 3rd week, which by standards is not that long to be on strike in terms of negotiations. And having listened to both sides and trying to weigh in on what exactly they're both looking for, I also feel that they're at a point where I don't think a mediator would actually benefit the discussion. I think an arbitrator, perhaps, if both sides are willing to go that route. But I'm not sure whether a council in a municipal government in our purview should be making recommendations to the provincial government on how they should be negotiating labor issues. And so I won't support the motion for those reasons. Thank you.
Any further discussion, Councillor Rentoul?
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's, I respect those comments, and I think that's why the motion's crafted in the manner in which it is. It's not looking to pick sides here. It's looking to compel the provincial government to get involved and to play a role in finding a resolution. And so I understand Councillor Garnett's position, but in this case, I think both parties who've failed to meet, certainly over the weekend or this week, are both looking for some help from the province, and we've seen nothing but inaction from the province at this point. And so I'd like to see our municipality encourage them, and I think we have every place to do so. I mean, we are the mechanism that collects on behalf of the school district. We're the mechanism that remits funding to the school district. We're party to that process by way of the School Act. And so I continue to encourage my colleagues in council to support the motion. Thank you.
Prior to moving forward, I'd ask staff for comment on procedure. We're past 10 p.m. Do we require a motion? It's 10:30? I'm sorry. Thank you. Councillor Duncan?
Thank you. I would say ordinarily I would agree with Councillor Garnett and the council overstepping kind of into this provincial area. However, unless I misunderstand what he has said, our MLA has in fact asked more people to step forward and put pressure on the provincial government because it is the provincial government's role at this point. As you say, it's probably an arbitrator, not a mediator, because the crux seems to be the Me Too's and the existence of those Me Too's. And the only way that they're going to get around this kind of intractable problem is if the province actually steps in and starts looking at their half of that bargaining. So I feel okay with doing what our MLA asked us to do and helping step up the pressure on the provincial government through him.
Further discussion? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? We have one opposed. The motion carries. Thank you, Councillor. We have item 16, which is correspondence for information.
Move receipt.
Second.
I'll call the question. Those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you. We have no notices of motion, and we have a motion to go on camera.
I'll move that it is in the opinion of council that the public interest requires that persons other than members of the council and officers be excluded from the meeting to consider confidential matters respecting personal information and municipal objectives, priorities, etc., pursuant to section 90.1A and L of the Community Charter, and that the council continue the meeting in closed session.
Second.
All in favor? Motion carries unanimous. Thank you. Motion to adjourn.
German.
Second. All those in favor? Motion carries. Thank you.